In death, as in life, Diana, Princess of Wales, aroused intense feelings. Many thought her one of the greatest figures of the 20th century. Others dismissed her as an attention seeker or a curse visited on the royal family. This series is the first attempt to stand back from all the controversies and tell the real story of a remarkable life. The wedding of Diana's parents, Johnny and Frances Spencer, was the social event of 1954. Their first home was here at Park House, in the grounds of the Queen's own Sandringham estate, where in 1961 Diana was born.
When I look back to life at Park House, I do think to myself what a wonderful, free and easy life we had. Always, I remember just laughter and jokes. Diana was a real tease. She loved to eat. She'd go into the kitchen and she'd chatter away to the staff and cajole them into giving her this and giving her that.
Just a happy little girl. I mean, all those children were full of fun. And she was 3 years older than her little brother, and her two sisters were rather more than that older than her, so she did have a little bit of an older sister or a motherly way that she looked after Charles, and it was very endearing.
Diana mostly enjoyed going to the beach, and when we got to the beach hut, Diana would be rushing around, setting everything up, getting the water on so that we could all have a drink. They would have competitions to see who could take off from the top and jump the furthest down. Some of them used to roll the whole way down. They would wander around collecting shells. It was very carefree time.
When she was 7, Diana's parents divorced. Her father won custody of the children. For the rest of her childhood, Diana shuttled between the homes of her estranged parents. In recent years, much has been made of Diana's childhood unhappiness. When her marriage to Prince Charles broke down, his friends told writers that Diana's behavior suggested a serious mental illness, one that had begun with her parents' divorce and had later ruined her marriage. One writer who has received many briefings about Diana's behavior from Prince Charles's circle is Penny Junor.
I believe that Diana was suffering from a severe psychological disorder, and I think that she had this disorder when she went into the relationship. I think she had it. She developed it as a child.
But those who knew Diana at the time tell a different story. Her parents' divorce was acrimonious, but she knew none of the details. And afterwards she saw a lot of both her mother and her father.
Well, of course, any divorce is bound to affect children. I don't think it affected Johnny and Frances' children any more or any less than any others. After all, they were not particularly short of cash. They had two loving parents, and despite the parents being divorced, were as happy as could be expected.
Diana's childhood was extremely happy, contrary to so many versions.
I did not notice any way that the instability which she showed later started in her childhood. No, definitely not. I'd certainly never noticed it.
In the security of her own home, she became very extrovert, more or less to the point of showing off, particularly in skills that she knew she had, such as her swimming. She'd run to the top of the slide and stand there poised, and she was beautiful and slim, and shout to everyone, "Look at me, look at me."
Diana was not academic, but she was talented at music, swimming and dance.
Diana was popular at school. She was part of a very big group who were very lively, full of fun. Diana certainly wasn't the leader of the group, but neither was she just a hanger-on. There was no one leader. They were all headstrong, very lively girls.
In 1975, Diana's grandfather died, so she inherited a title.
She rushed along the corridor with her dressing gown billowing out behind her, saying, I'm Lady Diana." She was so excited.
When Diana was 15, her father remarried to Rain, Countess of Dartmouth.
Well, I think Diana was very upset. She was devoted to her father, and I think perhaps any woman who came on the scene and wanted to take up all her father's time, she wouldn't have been too happy.
She was quite aware, I feel, that she was struggling with her schoolwork. She did try, and I think she hadn't a clue why she wasn't good. I think the underlying troubles at home in her family just affected her concentration. Her mind was somewhere else.
Diana failed all of her O-levels, but she was displaying other talents.
She'd go off on her bicycle to visit old ladies, to do their shopping for them, and she obviously had a real talent for dealing with people in that respect, and she obviously enjoyed it as well, and that was quite unusual for people of that age.
Diana helped run dances for patients at this hospital for the mentally and physically handicapped.
Diana was actually very relaxed, which was quite amazing because it was intimidating and overwhelming to walk into that huge place with the level of noise and to see some of the very severely handicapped people that we actually did have. She had most definitely a natural talent for communicating with very vulnerable people. I can remember seeing Diana do something that I was quite amazed because she appreciated that when people in wheelchairs were taken onto the dance floor, because the handles are behind them, they were being whizzed around, but they weren't actually dancing in the same way as other people. Diana danced backwards and drew the wheelchair towards her by holding the arms of the wheelchair. Now, that actually is incredibly agile and clever.
To Diana and her school friends, Prince Charles was a pin-up.
She had photos of him. She seemed to idolise him.
Charles briefly dated Diana's older sister, Sarah.
Finally, she met him, and she rushed into school the following Monday saying, I've met him. And it was like a sort of ongoing fairy tale, and we never dreamed that it would actually come true.
Diana attended this finishing school in Switzerland, but didn't complete the course and went to live in London. In 1979, after studying ballet and cookery, she applied for 2 part-time jobs looking after children.
The agency read her references and they described her as sweet-tempered, wonderful with children, and willing to do whatever she's asked. My doorbell rang a day or 2 later. She said, Mrs. Robertson, I'm Diana Spencer, so pleased to meet you.
She was never trained. She came purely as an assistant. But she did have a natural way with children. She was very good at getting down to their level, both physically and mentally. She didn't mind at all sitting on the floor, having children climbing all over her. And she talked to them. That's very important. And actually talked to them at eye level.
During the interview, what I liked most was that she focused totally on Patrick. She was ruffling his hair or handing him toys or giving him a little squeeze or a pat. Just absolutely an instant connection between the two of them. I never even checked her references further. I hired her on the spot.
When it came to lunchtime, she would be very happy to help prepare lunch. She was very domesticated.
Prince Charles was living in a very different world.
Problèmes du monde d'aujourd'hui seront les leurs demain. Et c'est à vous.
A bit impatient, an inquiring mind, very much like his father, full of ideas, very much like his father.
I'd known the Prince of Wales since he was about 16. He was wealthy, he was good-looking, he was intelligent, he was sporting, he was a man of action. He had all the aces.
There'd been a lot of talk about the dangers of this dive, the water so cold that a minute's exposure could cause paralysis.
He hated the phrase, and he won't like hearing it again, but I mean, he was described sometimes as action man. And there he was, unquestionably the most eligible bachelor in the entire world. Who was he going to marry? Somewhere along the line he'd said, maybe 30 might be a good time to get married. Often, with great respect to those who were named, I mean, completely dotty. Nothing wrong with the girl or the young woman in question, but never in a million years was she going to be the one. It just went on and on and on.
He took it very good-humouredly. I mean, you can either buckle under the stress of that particular pressure, or you can treat it in a light-hearted way and dissipate that problem. And that's what he did.
Charles was close to his great-uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten arranged rooms at his country home where Charles could enjoy privacy with his early girlfriends.
Because his own grandfather had died when he was a very small boy, and my father somehow, stepped into that position. And they were very, very close. And Prince Charles always asked his advice about every sort of thing. And they also had a lot of fun together and a lot of laughs together. Got up to all sorts of things together.
When Lord Mountbatten was killed by an IRA bomb, Prince Charles was devastated. By now, Diana was enjoying the rounds of society parties and balls.
She looked magnificent whenever I saw her that summer. Quite lovely, and she seemed to have a great number of admirers. The time I remember her best was at a big ball at Belvoir Castle. Indeed, Prince Andrew was at that dance, and he danced with Diana, and of course he was her age, so that was all absolutely fine.
That summer, Diana got her first chance to make a real impression on Prince Charles at a country house barbecue.
We sat down on a bale at the barbecue. I said, "You looked so sad when you walked down the aisle at Mountbatten's funeral. It was the most tragic thing I've ever seen. My heart bled for you when I watched. I thought it's wrong. You're lonely. You should be with somebody to look after you."
Soon after, Charles invited Diana to Scotland to join him and his parents at their Balmoral estate. The Spencer family had close connections with the court. Diana's grandmother, Lady Fermoy, was lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother.
Both grandmothers were involved, really, you might say, in the courtship. Both families were very enthusiastic about it taking place. It was definitely time that he got married, and here comes a girl who appears to be entirely suitable, so it's obvious that both families would encourage it and do what they could to promote it.
Years later, royal commentators would claim that at this stage of her life, at the start of her relationship with Prince Charles, Diana's mental instability was already beginning to show.
Diana suffered from borderline personality disorder as defined in Volume 4 of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders.
If you don't resolve the damage, you take it with you into adulthood, where it can affect your relationships with men.
The prince had been handed an almost impossible task.
But if Prince Charles's new girlfriend was suffering from a personality disorder, her employers saw no sign of it.
It was a huge step to hand over Patrick to a stranger in a strange city where we had no neighbors, we really didn't know anybody. But Diana just struck me as so sensible and grounded and committed to Patrick.
When she worked with us, she was a very normal, straightforward teenager. She was very shy, she was very kind, she was very considerate, always aware of others.
I really had no concerns about her being flighty or irresponsible. She was a very sensible young woman.
The public was soon told about Charles and Diana's romance.
And we first spotted her colleague Arthur Edwards, who was the photographer I worked with. He and I spotted her at a polo match.
I walked out with my camera and she just posed up. I thought, that's it, you know. And then I checked her age and found out she was 19. And I thought, Prince Charles, 30. He's running around with a 19-year-old girl. Doesn't sound right, so I didn't know about it.
During Diana's second visit to Balmoral, another photographer learned a little more.
We knew where Prince Charles's favourite fishing spots were, and we got to one, and we spotted a girl with him. I jumped out the car, and the girl disappeared into the trees behind Prince Charles, and he continued to fish as if there was no one with him. I watched for ages. Then I saw a hand coming round the tree with a compact mirror in her hand, and she pushed it round and wiggled it about to see where we were, and then walked away in a straight line, keeping the tree between us and her. And I thought, my God, who is this he's got? This is interesting.
He couldn't get a shot of Diana's face that day, but his rival at the Sun remembered the girl at the polo and put two and two together.
She burst into my bedroom and said, I have something important to tell you, Mrs. Robertson. And I was blowing my hair dry, and I said, oh, go ahead, tell me, Diana. And she said, no, I'd like your full attention, please. And she told me that when I left for work, I would see photographers and reporters at the end of the Muse. And again, I did a double take and said, good heavens, Diana, what have you done?
We had television crews front and back. We had photographers hanging out of trees, peering in windows. And I said, what are they doing here? And a rather embarrassed Diana said to me, well, actually, I think it could be something to do with me. So I said, oh.
I asked if it was with Andrew, because I knew it was, they were the same age. And she said no, and, she was blushing and kind of looking down at the floor and, very modest, very demure, very Diana, very understated. She said, no, actually had been with Prince Charles. And I just couldn't believe it. I said, oh, that's terribly exciting. Do you think anything's going to develop?
I went to
the Ritz Hotel to photograph Princess Margaret's 50th birthday party. And this girl came up behind us, very quiet, sort of young girl, and said, excuse me, can I get through? And as she walked in, one of the other photographers said, I'm sure that's that girl, what's her name, Diana Spencer or whatever. So we all sort of camped outside the Ritz all evening, and she didn't appear. You couldn't see anything from the party at all. And so everybody drifted off, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, very cold, freezing night, and suddenly she came out. She was all huddled up in this really unattractive green woolly coat that really looked very sort of dull and dowdy. And I looked at her and I thought, no, I'm sure these stories can't be true.
We found this nursery school, the Young England Kindergarten. I knocked on the door. Does Lady Diana Spencer work here? Yes. Would she come out and have a photograph taken?
They hung around and wouldn't go away. And I said to her, how do we get rid of them? What about if you go and have your photograph taken with them? And we were both very naive in those days and didn't realise this was not the way to get rid of photographers.
But she insisted on having 2 children with her from the nursery. And, of course, that was the picture where the sun came out halfway through the photographs and we saw her wonderful legs.
And I remember thinking, oh, dear, I think I've really blown this for her. And she took one look at it, went bright red, and put her hands up to her face in absolute horror.
How well are you coping with all the press attention? Well, as you can see, you can tell. Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you. Well, it is, naturally.
At lunchtime, on occasions, we needed something. And quite often, she would be the one to say, well, I'll go out and get it. I mean, never a question of, would you mind, because we knew what she was going to come up against. But I think she quite enjoyed belting out of the school. And in fact, one of my favourite photographs is of her running flat out with something for lunch under her arm.
She loved the camera, and she seemed to enjoy the attention in a sort of flustered, blushing sort of way. She couldn't resist it. We couldn't resist her.
You said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
Towards the end of 1980, when Diana was 19, the Spencer family was becoming excited by her developing relationship with the Prince of Wales.
I remember her father telling me that he was so thrilled that Prince Charles seemed to be so keen on Diana. But it wasn't really till after the New Year that we really knew it was going to... something was going to happen.
When I came to realise that the friendship between the Prince and Lady Diana was becoming very serious, and I thought back to the time when I'd seen her as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, yeah, I was a bit surprised. But by then she had grown up and matured, and now I'm a sufficiently red-blooded average male to think, my word, she is a very, very attractive young lady. And what a lucky chap he is.
Prince Charles later authorised his friends to describe the impression Diana made to Penny Junor.
She swept everybody off their feet. I mean, all his friends and his family, all the people that he introduced, with 1 or 2 exceptions, the people he introduced Diana to thought she was sensational.
I thought that it was a match made in heaven, and I think most of us did. And I thought that the Prince of Wales would take Diana under his wing and teach her the ways of the royal family and the direction that she should follow. And I couldn't think of a better tutor.
Lady Diana?
Every morning outside her flat, Diana faced crowds of journalists.
He told reporters yesterday that it may be coming soon. Was there any comment to make about that? Lady Diana? No comment all round.
She'd even sit in the front seat of my car and read Private Eye. And Diana would hoot with laughter when she read some of that, but Prince Philip kicking corgis up and down the corridor and stuff. She just thought it was great fun.
Private Eye ran a series lampooning Charles and Diana's romance. The magazine also printed stories about Prince Charles's love life in the months before he met her. One described a former Prince Charles fancy, Camilla. In another, she was referred to as his confidante, Camilla Parker Bowles. Prince Charles's authorized biography indicates that he had been having an affair with Camilla Parker Bowles in the months before he met Diana. Camilla and her husband Andrew were at Balmoral when Diana was first spotted by the riverbank, and Charles took Diana to 2 weekend parties here at the Parker Bowles' home.
Charles had a number of very trusted close friends in whose houses he knew he would be safe. He would be able to take Diana. There would be no question of press leaks. They would be safe.
Diana and Charles stayed with the Parker Bowleses as their house guest, and the two couples went to the races together. Diana later said she spent a bit too much of the courtship in Camilla's company.
I'd been staying with the Parker Bowleses an awful lot, and I couldn't understand why she kept saying to me, "Don't push him into this, don't do that." She knew so much about what he was doing privately, and about what we were doing privately.
She would comment repeatedly about how hard he had to work, and she didn't like that because it meant that he didn't have much time to see her. He would be gone for long periods of time. They didn't have very many one-on-one dinners or romantic evenings. He was very busy. Certainly, yes, it was not dating as anybody would imagine it.
Charles wrote to a friend that he was in a confused and anxious state of mind over his intentions towards Diana. He also wrote,
"It is just a matter of taking an unusual plunge into some rather unknown circumstances that inevitably disturbs me. But I expect it will be the right thing in the end. It all seems so ridiculous because I do very much want to do the right thing for this country and for my family. But I'm terrified sometimes of making a promise and then perhaps living to regret it."
But Diana was certain of her feelings.
There is no doubt in my mind that she thought he was the most wonderful thing on the face of the earth, and she said specifically that she would simply die if this didn't work out.
Diana came back to visit just before she got engaged. She burst into our sitting room and just beamed. And of course we said, "What are these rumours? Are they true about you and Prince Charles?" And the beam got bigger and bigger, and she just said, "I can't possibly say," and continued to beam for the rest of the afternoon.
Since she was a small girl, Diana had looked forward to this moment.
We used to go for long walks across the estate. Diana used to say to me, "The only thing that I want is to be really happily married and to have lots of children." She said, "It's so sad to be on your own." She said, "I'm never going to be on my own," because she said, "My husband and I will always be together."
Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course. Whatever in love means.
According to Diana, this was not the first time Charles had used this phrase.
He said, "Will you marry me?" I said, "Yes, I love you so much. I love you so much." He said, "Whatever love means." He said it then.
This man is not like the rest of us. He can't tell a little white lie. He can't just say, "Yes, of course, we're madly in love." He thinks too hard about everything and feels compelled to articulate what he's thinking.
To protect Diana from the media, the royal family found her a safe house. She left both her jobs and her flat, moved into Buckingham Palace, where she was given an apartment, a footman, and a maid. but Charles was often away.
Diana, from the moment she was engaged, was rather cut off from reality. She was leaving all her friends behind, all the close contacts, all the people who she could have had little girly talks with or received strength from.
It's a tremendous change for someone, I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden.
It is, but I've had a small run out to it all in the last 6 months. And next to British Charles and I can't go wrong. He's there with me. British Charles and I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
Whatever in love means.
The prince went off to Australia and New Zealand after they were engaged because he had to go. The arrangements had already been made.
As Charles was preparing to leave, he received a phone call.
The most awful thing had happened before he went. I was in his study talking to him when the telephone rang. It was Camilla, just before he was going for 5 weeks. I thought, shall I be nice, or shall I just sit here? So I thought I'd be nice, so I left them to it. It just broke my heart.
Soon after, Diana was filmed crying at the airport. When Charles had returned, Diana came across a present in the office of Michael Colborne, the prince's secretary. She later explained what happened to royal biographer Anthony Holden.
Diana was looking over the wedding presents and saw one that she wasn't supposed to see, which was a bracelet with the initials G and F on it. And Camilla and Charles's nicknames for each other, or code names if you like, were Gladys and Fred. And Diana knew this from some flowers that Charles had sent Camilla when she was ill. So poor Colborne was in a very unenviable situation of having to explain to the princess-to-be that this was actually a present that Charles had ordered to give to Camilla as a sort of farewell, I'm getting married present.
Diana confronted Charles about the bracelet. According to 2 royal courtiers, Diana said,
I asked Charles if he was still in love with Camilla Parker Bowles, and he didn't give me a clear answer. What am I to do?
One of their colleagues told this programme,
My initial reaction was to panic. It was 10 days until the wedding. How do we get her down the aisle?
In an attempt to defuse the situation, the courtiers arranged a lunch between Diana and Camilla in a discreet London restaurant called Ménage à Trois. Senior courtiers have told this programme that when Diana returned to the palace, she said,
It was brilliant. We all understand each other.
But Diana later told a different story.
She told me that Camilla asked her, would you be spending much time hunting? And Diana said, no, I don't like horses. I fell off one when I was a child. And she could see the look of relief on Camilla's face. She certainly believed that hunting and horses was going to be how Camilla would keep Charles.
The presence of Camilla in Charles's life, whether she was his lover, his friend, or merely the recipient of his gifts, would go on causing Diana anxiety. Days later, Diana learned that Charles was planning to visit Camilla and give her the bracelet. Less than a week before the wedding, Diana went to watch Charles playing polo.
Following up, battling it out with Prince Charles. Prince Charles now is going to fall for Dollar. Dollar's looking very good.
She broke down in tears. The palace staff blamed nerves and exhaustion.
This is the third chukker. Everything to play for.
I was playing in the match, and Prince Charles was playing for the Navy. I think the Army lost by 1 goal. Actually, I fouled him before the end of the last chukker, which gave away a penalty, a 40-yard penalty, from which he was able to score. So it was my fault that they lost. He got the goal, and I said, well, there's your wedding present, sir.
As her wedding day approached, Diana asked courtiers whether Charles really loved her. Embarrassed by such directness, they changed the subject. One told this program,
"Lovely chap though he was, Charles gave no indication of thinking through what getting married to him would be like for Diana. He carried on with his merry ways, his extracurricular bachelor life. To her, it was a massively bigger thing."
But Diana and Charles did have happy times during their engagement.
The people of Tetbury look upon the couple as their next-door neighbours, for Highgrove House is less than a mile away from the church bells. On the big day, this area is going to be alive with street celebrations, so today was something of a rehearsal.
He introduced her to the locals, they did a walkabout and visited the local hospital. And, you know, she was very nervous. He was like the proud peacock showing her off, but he was very gentle and he always had an arm around her, showing her what to do, watching her all the time, and obviously was sort of gently nurturing her into it.
And Diana was cheerful when she returned to the kindergarten where she had worked.
We, I suspect, were the only people who had the bride-to-be at our royal wedding party. She was very happy and obviously very excited. She was looking wonderful.
But Diana, only just 20, was swinging between euphoria and despair.
I'm sure that Diana did have reservations about getting married at that stage because her father told me so. She said just before the wedding, "I'm afraid I simply cannot go through with it. I can't go through with it."
When she expressed these reservations to anyone, such as her sister Sarah, they joked it off. Sarah told her, "Well, your face is on the tea towel, so it's too late to do anything now." Other people said to her, "Well, it's just simply pre-wedding nerves. You'll be all right once the day arrives."
She was extremely gentle, very shy, and she was someone that, as a young girl, you thought was everything a princess should be. Very beautiful, very young, very calm, and yet there was a certain nervousness about her.
I just remember my first reaction when she got out of the carriage was when I looked at her dress and I thought, oh no, it's awful, because it was all scrunched up and it looked terrible. And I just thought, oh God, you know, and that doesn't look like it's been ironed.
The feeling inside the cathedral, I remember, was just enormous. It's a very sort of hollow place, but it was filled with so many people and so much warmth.
The thing I remember the most about the wedding, funnily enough, was not only the atmosphere inside, but also hearing the noises from outside, because that was the only way that you were aware that actually there were an awful lot of other people watching this event as well.
I remember being so in love with my husband that I couldn't take my eyes off him. I absolutely thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. He was going to look after me. Walking down the aisle, I spotted Camilla. pale grey pillbox hat. Saw it all. Her son Tom standing on a chair. To this day, you know. Vivid memory. Well, there you are. Let's hope that's all over with.
Charles Philip Arthur George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honour and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other keep thee only unto her, so long as you both shall live?
I will.
Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day. But fairy tales usually end at this point with the simple phrase, they lived happily ever after.
750 million people watched Diana's wedding on television. Every gesture and word was analysed.
I had a contact inside the palace who was very close to the balcony, who telephoned me from inside Buckingham Palace and said that Charles had asked for the Queen's permission to kiss Diana. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, Andrew said, go and give her a kiss. Charles replied, I'm not getting into that caper. And Andrew says, oh yes, go on. And Charles says to his mother, may I? And the Queen says yes, and he then kisses her.
Such intense scrutiny would continue. Before their marriage, Diana had complained that Charles was often away, and on their honeymoon, life on board the Royal Yacht Britannia was anything but private. There were formal dinners, church parades, and the constant attendance of crewmen and courtiers. The difference in the couple's interests drew them apart. As Charles wrote at the time, he was happy reading.
All I can say is that marriage is very jolly, and it's also extremely pleasant being together in Britannia. Diana dashes about, chatting up all the sailors and the cooks in the galley, while I remain hermit-like, sunk with pure joy into one of Lawrence van der Post's books.
One evening, while Charles was dressing for dinner, the first serious row of their marriage broke out.
She finds him wearing cufflinks with his initials on, which he's been given by Camilla. She protests about this. He protests back and says she's a close friend, why shouldn't I wear the cufflinks? I think any bride would be entitled to be a bit upset if a newlywed husband wore cufflinks given him as a wedding present by another woman about whom she was very concerned.
Charles and Diana's honeymoon included a month in the Highlands with the Queen, the royal family, and a group of Charles's friends.
How are you enjoying married life? Highly recommend it. How do you like Balmoral as a place? It's lovely.
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
For the cameras, they put on a good show, but the couple spent much time apart. Charles read and painted. He also hunted and walked, accompanied by his friends. Diana tended to stay indoors.
Knowing the Prince of Wales as I did, and knowing the fact that most of his friends had been older than he was, I did wonder how she would cope at the dinner table. Not putting her down in any way, but I mean, she would just not be in the same league.
A guest at Balmoral told this programme,
"At dinner one night, the Queen cornered me and said, 'I don't know what we can do. Look at her sitting at the table glowering at us. The only time she bucks up is when Charles speaks to her.' I said to her, 'Perhaps if you look round the table, they're all so much older than her.' She said, 'I don't care, she'll just have to buck up.'"
Another courtier reflected on the honeymoon.
Two things screwed the relationship: the Queen and his family constantly siding with him, and the Camilla question. Diana was always asking about it.
I remember crying my eyes out. At night I dreamt of Camilla the whole time. It rained and rained and rained. I didn't trust him. Thought every 5 minutes he was ringing her up.
Charles was so worried that he summoned his trusted aide, Michael Colburn, from London. He asked Colburn to sit with Diana while he and his friends went out stalking deer. Colburn sat alone with the princess from 9 until 4. Between brooding silences, she complained to him about Balmoral and Charles's absences.
I believe that when he got married, Prince Charles fully knew what getting married meant, what it involved. Perhaps he thought that he would be able to keep more of his old lifestyle going than would normally be the case. He would still want to go hunting, and he would still prefer the companionship from time to time of older people, which he always had done.
Even before their honeymoon was over, a pattern had been set that the royal couple would find difficult to break. Charles bewildered at Diana's distress, Diana suspicious whenever Charles was away from her.
Diana's whole life, in all the years that I knew her from a young child through to her marriage, the main emphasis within her life had been placed on the importance of a marriage with love and a close family unit. Without those, she would have felt that the marriage was a sham.
Three months after her wedding, Diana's first public appearances as a princess were in Wales. After 2 noisy and tiring days, the tour reached the quiet market town of Brecon.
It was very cold, but people didn't seem to notice the cold because they were so excited about Diana coming. And then we heard all the cheering from downtown, so we knew they'd arrived. So it was just a matter of waiting then for them to walk up through the towns.
Prince Charles indicated to me that they would each take a side of the road. And at a certain stage, he would take the initiative and he would decide to go over. And every time this happened, you had this huge awe from the people that she was leaving. And all the time people kept calling,
"Die, die," to come to their side. So I don't know quite how Charles felt, but we were thrilled.
In a sea of unfamiliar faces, Diana sought reassurance from one she recognised from before her marriage.
She actually mouthed, "How am I doing?" And I just burst out laughing and said, "OK," back to her. But we still had that little bit of contact then. She needed to find out, was she doing it right from somebody?
She was so conscious of the small children behind the barriers, and irrespective of the fact that that outfit of hers must have cost a mint, down she goes, not just bending, but down on her haunches to these little ones behind the barriers.
I'd like to try to express my thanks to you in Welsh. Mae'n bleser cael dod I Gymru. Hoffwn ddod eto yn fuan. Diolch yn fawr.
Until now, Prince Charles had always been the centre of attention. A senior courtier who accompanied the couple in Wales told this programme,
"I caught Charles kicking a pebble around. He said, 'They don't want to see me.'"
He was picking up the flowers and they were saying, "Could you possibly give this to your wife, please?" And he said rather ruefully, "Well, you know, at least I know my place now. I'm nothing more than a carrier of flowers for my wife." And that was fine to begin with.
I've come to the conclusion that really it would have been far easier to have had 2 wives. To have covered both sides of the street. And I could have walked down the middle, directing the operation.
In the midst of all this walkabout and touring, Diana wouldn't do anything. Charles would do lots of things. He would make speeches. A lot of the speeches he thought were quite important speeches because he had a huge audience, so he'd worked hard at a speech. And of course, the next day, nothing would appear of Charles. I mean, it wasn't the Charles and Diana show, it was the Diana show.
He said, well, this pressure, that will go away, won't it? And I said, I'm sorry, but it won't. No, and it never will. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but if I did, I would be telling you a lie.
Diana was photographed outside a sweet shop and was upset by it. The Fleet Street editors were summoned to Buckingham Palace.
And in came the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and she made it clear that she was worried that Diana had not got the experience of having been followed by photographers all her life. And this was something new, and she felt that the poor girl was being harassed.
For the Queen to share such worries with the press was unprecedented.
She said, for example, she goes down to the local shop, village shop, to buy some sweets or something, and there are photographers and reporters there. Can't you leave her alone?
The Sun's editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, had been invited to attend the meeting, but declined.
The Sun had no reverence for the royal family. We didn't believe in following rules laid down by the old guard at the palace. We went our own way, and Kelvin printed my stories, whether they liked them or not.
Everyone liked the next story. Just a year after her wedding, Diana gave birth to a son, Prince William.
Your Royal Highness, how are you feeling?
3 months later, at the funeral of Princess Grace of Monaco, Diana represented the Queen. One of the staff who accompanied her told this programme,
"She was absolutely brilliant. She came into her own." And on the aircraft back, she burst into tears with exhaustion. She asked, "Will Charles be there to meet us?" We looked at her big eyes looking out of the window in expectation. She said, "There's one police car." That meant that Charles wasn't coming.
Another courtier recalled,
"She rang up and asked me, 'Have you seen the papers?' I said, 'You are absolutely brilliant, ma'am.' She said, 'Thanks for saying that, because nobody at Balmoral has mentioned it.'"
Diana, just 21, began looking for a role of her own.
She wasn't swallowed up by the royal family, and she didn't just become another member of the royal family. She had her very, very much her own personality, which she was enabled to express, and when she had her own interests, she was able to pursue them.
I first met the Princess of Wales about 6 months after William was born. At the time, I ran a mother and baby research charity called Birthright. She came to an event, the Brilliant and Beautiful Evening of Fashion. She kept on running back to me and saying, "Am I doing it right?" She was terribly nervous, trembling, unsure of herself.
A year later, the royal couple embarked on a 6-week tour of Australia and New Zealand. Diana was a sensation.
She was a mega star. I mean, there was just thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just come to see this lady. And I mean, it was no secret. She loved it. I mean, she absolutely loved it. She was the star in this open-top car. She was arriving like she was already the Queen. You know, she was so... The crowd was screaming for her. Diana, Diana.
But even within her own family, some worried about the adulation she was receiving.
Diana had much too much fame, much too early. In fact, I remember being pestered by everybody, saying that you're related to Diana, this perfect being. I mean, she was almost a goddess at that stage. It was pathetic what people thought about her.
She did take centre stage. This was one of the problems that came between her and the Prince of Wales. That she became such a glamorous figure as his wife, that she stole the limelight, and I don't think he minded that initially at all. I think in fact he was rather pleased and proud, but it grew irksome as the time went on.
She was inundated with praise, and she was on the front of every magazine. She was just unable really to get on with settling down as the wife and mother that she should have done. And I think that's where the problem started.
2 years after Prince William's birth, Prince Harry was born. On the surface, all was well, but Diana was frustrated.
The Princess of Wales felt that she had a contribution to make, that she was talented, that she had a wonderful sense of communication, that it wasn't appreciated as it should have been.
Diana suffered from lack of praise and lack of company.
She would go back to Kensington Palace in the evening and have dinner by herself on a tray on her knees watching television. And it was that she found disturbing. The adulation on the one hand and the loneliness on the other.
Some palace employees had sold stories to the newspapers. Diana was advised to be discreet. She looked for friends outside the royal circle.
I used to look after her sister, and they obviously talked about me, and she expressed a desire to meet me and to have some treatments, and we took it from there. When I very first met her, about the third visit that she came to me, she said, do you think that you could call me Diana? And I said, well, if it's not presumptuous, yes, I would love to.
Janet Filderman soon became one of Diana's closest confidants. She has never before spoken publicly.
We'd talk on the telephone a great deal. I mean, she'd phone me up in the evenings, probably 9 o'clock or something like that, or later sometimes.
I name this ship Royal Princess. May God bless her and all who sail in her.
It's sad for a young woman to end her busy day on her own. For her, the joy would have been if she could have come home and had a conversation with her husband about what her day had been like. Now, she could have spoken to him on the telephone for all I was aware, but it would appear that this didn't happen very often because she phoned me or she phoned some other friend.
You have, ladies and gentlemen,
he is Prince of Wales. His duty is 9/10 of his life. He is committed on every day of the year, practically, to some good cause or some engagement. He cannot, with the best will in the world, however head over heels in love he might be, he cannot devote 100% of his time to a woman.
Prince Charles's regular absences made Diana think that he had resumed his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles.
She talked to me about Camilla, and I did the best I could to calm her down, to make her put her energies into constructive things.
Diana's suspicion about her husband and Camilla was a source of repeated conflict within Kensington Palace. Soon, journalists were picking up hints that all was not well.
I was being told behind the scenes that there were problems in the marriage, that they were rowing and arguing, fighting.
A senior courtier told this programme
she wanted him to stay at home with her and the children. There were tantrums and hysterics. She challenged him. It was the first time he had been challenged.
In describing his marriage to a friend, Prince Charles wrote,
"It is like being trapped in a rather desperate cul-de-sac with no apparent exit."
But in public, they continued triumphant. On the royal couple's first American tour, Diana's dresses were made by Britain's most fashionable designers. The purpose of the visit was to promote British art and heritage. But all eyes were on the fairy tale princess.
The American media's tongue was hanging out, though, during the whole trip, and they just loved the glamour and loved the way she looked.
When she first came here, she was asked who she'd like to meet, and I don't think there was anyone who would have refused her. She could have had anyone she wanted, in other words, and she picked John Travolta.
Dance with the princess, Mr. Travolta. She'd like you to. What sort of dance would you choose for preference?
Oh, something of her choice.
The White House has these menu cards, which often people sign and pass them around, so you have a kind of record of all the autographs of who's at your table. And the princess was sitting on the right of the president, President Reagan, and then next to her was Baryshnikov.
Baryshnikov, the great Russian dancer, was seated next to Diana because of her childhood enthusiasm for ballet.
And as the menu cards came around, it stopped Baryshnikov, and she said, "But what's the matter? Don't you want me to autograph yours?" And he was shy. And she said, "Well, you know, I have your autograph." She had stood in the rain outside the stage door at Covent Garden as a teenager in order to get Baryshnikov's autograph, and that melted him.
Diana had asked to meet the woman for whom she had worked as a nanny.
Diana was just herself. She rushed across the floor, didn't give us a chance to curtsy or bow. Again, that wonderful big hug. How are you? How wonderful to come all this way. Patrick picked him up, just Diana again. Charles was very witty, very gracious, and they got Patrick settled on the sofa between the two of them. They looked very happy to me. They even joked, I had my daughter by then. They were even joking with each other about, well, they hoped that the next time that they would have a girl.
The great degree of taste and the amazing...
Attention frequently wandered from the purpose of the visit.
Collected so much throughout Europe.
We had a press conference, which was the opportunity for the prince actually to sing for his supper. And then the very first question from the press has to do with how the princess enjoyed dancing with John Travolta.
Well, I'm not a glove puppet, so I can't answer for that, I'm afraid. But I think you enjoyed it, didn't you, Ronnie? Be an idiot if she didn't enjoy dancing with John Travolta, wouldn't she?
Diana seemed relaxed in public, but was beginning to reveal hints of her unhappiness.
Diana wrote immediately to me, which in itself is strange. And she referred to the fact that it was wonderful seeing Patrick and me because it reminded her of such a happy time in her life, and it was wonderful to get back in touch with people she'd known when her life was simpler and happier.
I sent her a birthday card and was very surprised
delighted to, and very thrilled to get a letter thanking me for the card. I mean, a thank you letter for a birthday card in itself was fairly remarkable, but the fact that it actually had been written on the day of her birthday, I actually found rather sad, because I felt she should have been doing other things than sitting there writing thank you letters for birthday cards.
Dearest Janet, you really are the most thoughtful person I know. Never to miss a birthday or anything important, especially in my life, ! You restored me completely last night, as on our return from the tour, I felt an emotional wreck that you're very much in my thoughts. Keep smiling. With love from Diana. And there's the little man who's smiling all the time, and she does that from time to time. She's rather sweet.
Diana looked so thin that some thought she might be anorexic. Years later, Diana said that throughout the early years of the marriage, she had suffered from the eating disorder bulimia nervosa. But the woman who worked on her skin thinks that Diana's bulimia was intermittent, a response to moments of stress.
I don't think she had bulimia as I know it. I mean, I have 2 or 3 clients who have really been like that and are like that in some instances. And believe me, there's no comparison, because Diana had a super figure, wonderful teeth, good quality hair, skin was good, eyes were bright. I don't think you can have any of those outward signs if you have bulimia badly.
While the popular press focused on Diana's weight, they began to treat her husband as a figure of fun. They mocked his public speeches, his policy initiatives, and even his passion for gardening. Prince Charles agreed to help with the writing of a biography that would highlight his serious work. He encouraged his friends to speak to the author, Penny Junor.
I was picking up very strong vibrations that there were real problems in the marriage. The marriage simply was not a success.
Diana said later that she was sure that her husband had been seeing Camilla Parker Bowles throughout the marriage. But Prince Charles's closest friends told Penny Junor that it was only now, in the mid-1980s, that the two re-established contact.
Charles went back to Camilla in 85, 86. Friends brought them together. Friends who were desperately worried about the prince. He was incredibly despondent. I mean, he was on the brink of real despair. And friends thought that he needed someone to talk to. They knew that he had always got on very well with Camilla. She'd always been very good for him, good with him.
After 5 years of marriage, Diana was spending most of her time at Kensington Palace and Prince Charles at their country home, Highgrove. Then in June 1986, Diana met a young cavalry officer. He was at Buckingham Palace to help organise the mounted escort for the wedding of Prince Andrew.
And I think she said something like, where are you going dressed up? Like a dog's dinner or something like that. It was quite sweet. Basically, I was struck by her charisma, if you like, and her beauty. And she had very piercing blue eyes. I think she was trying to find out more about me and what I did, and she learnt that, I was a riding instructor. And that's really how we started. I mean, she then said she would like to learn to ride, or learn to ride again. She had hurt herself as a young child, falling off, and lost her nerve, and wanted to get her nerve back again. She said, I wish I could come riding more often. I wish I could see you more often. Would you like to come and have lunch, or would you like to come to the opera? So, I mean, it was becoming more evident to this rather slow brain that she enjoyed, my company.
We'd been riding, I think it was sort of fairly winterish, and we were having coffee and biscuits in the officers' mess at Windsor. It was quite crisp and cold outside. She just poured out all her problems to me. Which was extraordinary, because that was the first time I realised how dreadfully unhappy she was. And she was very tearful at that stage. So she came and sat next to me and, and we hugged each other.
Prince Charles, too, had found support outside the marriage, as Penny Junor's biography hinted.
I'm not saying they immediately began an affair once they got together again, but they started to talk, and he desperately needed someone to talk to. Charles had never loved anyone quite so much, either before or since. The clear implication, although I didn't actually spell it out, being that Camilla had been, and once again was, a great love of his life.
James Hewitt invited Diana to visit him at his mother's home in Devon. It was to be the first of many such weekends.
Detective had to come down and sort of suss the joint out and make sure that she would obviously be safe. We were all a little apprehensive, hoping that everything would be all right. But thereafter, there was no problem.
Diana always arrived in Devon with her Royal Protection officers, who also spent weekends at the house.
She'd arrive on a Friday evening, and she'd come bouncing in an excited mood. And then just, sort of go up and, hug my mother and say hello. Probably half knocking her over, and, because my mother hadn't quite got up from her curtsy yet.
She was the person I had envisaged her to be. She was just Diana. She discovered that we liked a little tipple after our dinner at night, and so she nicked a bottle of orange vodka from the cellar at Highgrove, and it was excellent. And thereafter, each time she came down, she managed to smuggle a bottle. I should think Prince Charles must have wondered, he must have thought he had a secret drinker in the house.
She enjoyed the family existence and the friendship, and, she wanted to be a part of it. Of everyone mucking in the kitchen and helping and washing up. I mean, she wouldn't cook, but she'd wash up. Great laughy times.
They seemed to enjoy each other's company. They seemed to be relaxed in each other's company, and it was fun. Diana sat back in the chair and looked up and looked around, and she said, "Christ, this is such a lovely place." Sometimes they used to borrow my car because it was a little less conspicuous to go off rather than her rather smart green Jaguar.
We'd go for a walk along the beach at Budley Salterton, along the pebble beach there. So, as near as damn it was sort of normal existence, yeah. She would say, it'd be great to just be an army wife. That's what she wanted. That's what she said she wanted. And to, find somewhere that's cosy and comfortable. A bit of a sort of a dream house, a dream cottage. We spoke about that at length quite often. It wasn't just a fling. It certainly wasn't just a fling for me, and I know that it wasn't a fling for her. I was deeply in love at that stage, and Well, I hope that she... I mean, if she had felt half as much of that, then I would be very happy to think that.
I suppose I had in the back of my mind, you know, is this a pipe dream, or is it going to come about? I hoped that no one was going to get hurt.
Back in London, Diana's public life was changing. She received hundreds of requests to become patron of charities. The Middlesex Hospital was about to open a pioneering AIDS unit.
A letter was written to the palace asking whether a member of the royal family would be prepared to open the ward. And I think we actually expressed a preference for Prince Charles, and we got a letter back saying, no, he was too busy, but would we consider the Princess of Wales? And we jumped at it. The media were absolutely everywhere. She was very nervous, and I have to say we were very nervous. She came in, we did a very short seminar for her, and then we took her into the ward.
In 1987, panic about AIDS had turned those suffering from it into outcasts. Some believed that the disease could be transmitted by a casual touch.
The moment somehow she started sort of meeting patients, she did relax. And of course there was that very famous photograph of her shaking hands with a patient who had AIDS, and that was wired all over the world. It made a tremendous impact, just a member of the royal family touching someone. It was a colossal impact. Shouldn't have been, but it was.
But Diana believed that the rest of the royal family were uneasy about her success.
She told me that, you know, I think they're jealous because I seem to be more popular. There was definitely friction in the family. Actually, there were times when she was frustrated, so much so that, you know, she would become unguarded in her criticism, for example, towards the Queen. She would say, you know, the Queen doesn't appreciate what I'm doing. She's not helping me. I try to... I mean, she strongly felt that she wasn't getting any support from above.
The phone might go and it would be Diana ringing from some outlandish place to see how we all were. And it wasn't just a sort of 3-minute sort of, you know, hello, how are you? I'm here in such and such a country. But she would, you know, want to know what one had been doing, and she'd chat away and say most probably what she'd been doing or what she hadn't been doing, or and it was like, well, just as if she wanted to make contact back home.
Diana and James Hewitt tried to live like a normal couple whenever possible. Hewitt regularly stayed with Diana at Kensington Palace and Highgrove.
Policeman would open the barrier and said, oh yes, we're expecting you, and park outside their apartments. There were times where I arrived before she had returned, and she'd come in still fairly hyped up and bubbly and excited, and the whole place would light up and change, and she'd come over and hug me and say, I can see you've started on the whiskey already, or something like that. And there was always a joke and a laugh and a kiss, and it was just wonderful. I mean, it's just wonderful existence.
Prince Charles and Diana were apart not only for some weekends. On weekdays too, they often had separate engagements, and Diana had become a confident solo act.
The contrast between the early Diana, terribly nervous, anxious, and the Diana in later years was extraordinary. I remember there was this big event at Buckingham Palace. Lots of people who'd paid £1,000 a head to be there. And she just looked at me and she said, let's plunge in, Vivian. Held her nose and said, here we go. And off she went. And utterly confident to work a room.
Diana's confidence was boosted by the fact that her affair remained out of the newspapers.
My best contacts were royal servants, and they would tell me the truth. We picked up on the Hewitt affair and believed that they were meeting in secret and believed that they were lovers. But again, how would you prove it? How could you write it? Impossible.
Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles risked being seen together at society parties. Diana and James Hewitt were also seen in public together.
She said, well, what are you doing this weekend? Can we go down to Devon, or will you come to Highgrove, or whatever? And so I said, no, I'm afraid I can't, or we can't go to Devon because I've got to play in a match on Saturday in Tidworth. And she said, oh, dear, well, can I come and watch? I said, well, that's going to be very difficult, isn't it? And it's going to be, I'd love you to, but I mean, it's going to be really obvious. And she said, oh, I suppose so, you're right. She said, who are you playing? And I said, we're playing the 13th, 18th. And you could see her face light up and a twinkle in her eye, and she immediately got a plan together in her mind. She said, I'm colonel of the regiment.
The big match starts at 2:30.
And the commanding officer came over, and he said, James, I think you ought to know, just keep this to yourself, but Princess of Wales is coming to support us. You might just want to be aware, follow the right protocol and all that. I said, oh, well, thank you very much indeed, Colonel, for letting me know that.
The guest of honour had to present the trophy to the victors, led by James Hewitt.
I don't think she could speak, other than saying, well done. I think she was about to get the giggles. She didn't really say very much to me at all. But I mean, she looked at me and I looked at her, and we didn't really need to say anything. So I said thank you very much and walked back as quick as I could. And then she actually held the others in conversation. Again, put in a wonderful chair. And she said to Rupert Mackenzie Hill, "You're wonderful. I've heard so much about you." And she was just having great fun. It's a lovely, lovely day.
Diana's romance was a widely shared secret. A senior courtier told this programme,
"When I joined royal service, I was quietly told that Charles and Diana had both found love with new partners. There was a great deal of pleasure taken in this in the palace."
I suppose it was quite weird being at Highgrove. It was far harder to relax there, of course, than, for example, in Devon, because there were staff there, and with all that entails. Those who work there were, kept very much in the background. I suppose, other than when you walked around the gardens and the camera follows you, the security camera follows you. But inside the house, a little more relaxed. Diana told me that she had discussed our relationship with her husband. It was a tacit understanding between Diana and Charles that I was a part of her life in the same way that Mrs. Parker Bowles was a part of Prince Charles's life. Not only that, I'm suggesting that it was understood by those who are in political authority and over us, and security, and the household, the royal household. Those three factions knew about it. They knew the extent of the relationship. yet nothing was done, no approach was made to stop it. Now, that to me means that there is some kind of approval.
Aristocratic, well-bred families have, when their own marriage has staled, or they've grown bored with one another, or it hasn't worked out, for whatever reason, they traditionally have not divorced, but they have pursued relationships elsewhere and remained together for the sake, in aristocratic families, for the estates and the inheritance, and for the children. Now, it seemed to me that this is what they had.
I know that at certain stages she wanted to reconcile her marriage and to try and get Charles to love her. I know that. You know, I didn't relish in it, but I would have been fine. I mean, it would have been, you know... had she gone back to him, I think that would have been a good thing, if it had lasted. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Rival camps of friends, his and hers, began to talk.
At the time, and this was about 1987, 1988, I was aware that there was a lot of briefing against Diana. That, you know, she was unstable, she was difficult, she was awkward.
The briefings from Charles's friends would come very often at polo matches when he would be playing, you'd be on the sidelines, and the subject would come up of the marriage and suggestions that it wasn't going very well. And then the friend would say, well, of course, she can be a very difficult woman, can't she? And so, subtly, or perhaps unsubtly at times, they planted the seed that Diana was the one to blame.
After 8 years of marriage, Diana made her first high-profile solo visit overseas. On the 3-day trip to New York to raise money for the arts and to boost British exports, she also asked to visit institutions for the most deprived. Diana's private office approached the Henry Street Refuge for the Homeless in New York's poor Lower East Side. The staff had a long-standing suspicion of celebrity visits.
I feel like the princess might be on a guilt trip, like not really concerned about our people, but more like, well, it'll be in the newspaper on the society page that Princess Di came to see a homeless shelter, rather than really having an impact on what's happening to poor people.
Diana's New York visit was organized by her new equerry, Patrick Jeffson.
Royalty very often is theatre. My job was to make sure that she appeared in a way which brought most credit to the organization that she was representing or visiting. She was very pragmatic, rather perhaps like a politician in that way. She knew the raw power of the media, almost instinctively.
And they opened the door, and this very tall, thin woman got out, and she reached for my hand, and she's shaking my hand, and she's, oh, hi, and she's, so then I'm like, whoa. So these are all split-second kinds of things, but then before I could get nervous, then she says, hey, we're wearing the same colors. Right. Then for me, it was like, this woman is real. And the princess, she had a way of kind of looking down when she speaks. So you kind of got to look up at her, and she's tall too, so we were kind of looking up, and I saw Shirley kind of looking like, uh-oh, Shirley. Finally, Shirley said, ooh, but you so pretty. And that's when everybody rolled. We were like, uh-oh.
And I just burst out. I said something like, listen, I just got to say it. I don't know if I should say it or not, but oh my God, your skin is so beautiful. And then everybody started laughing because it was, it was like everybody being so polite, so, and she was just so human. I think Frances dropped a button.
One of the buttons popped off and she beat me to it.
picked it right up, and she said to me, we have to keep up with these little things. So it was like really nice. And then her conversation was, it was just genuine. She wasn't just asking questions, she was there with us.
So by now, you know, we're like old buddies. People were crowded all around. There was a kid with some tulips. And she just broke away from security, from where we were, and went over to that kid, and she started shaking hands with everybody on the behind the barricade. And again, it was like, wow, just look at her.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Some have looked at Diana's charity work with less sympathy, accusing her of being more interested in headlines than helping the needy.
I've studied a number of celebrities and reprobate politicians and others who've gone the charity route to enhance their reputations or to try and recover them. Over the even medium run, it's indissolubly related to cynicism.
Patrick Jeffson, who was with Diana at Henry Street, has also questioned her motives for visits like this.
The compassion she showed at the time was quite genuine. So the motives that brought her to that place might be less than entirely compassionate. But while she was there doing the job, I was never in any doubt that her compassion was genuine. And I think the people on the receiving end knew that too.
She talked to a child. She didn't just talk to the kid. She saw his shoes was untied, just being a natural, and just tied his shoes. You know, went to the family school, was down there with the kid. You would think of a princess. You know, you would, you know, like, I don't want to compare, but, you know, stuck up in the nose or whatever, you know, but she wasn't like that at all. Because, like I said, she's still here, a piece of her. She left that here.
But back home, Diana's private life came under pressure. James Hewitt, who had been stationed in Windsor, was given a new posting to Germany.
She said, do you have to go? And I said, well, yes, I do have to go to Germany. There is no way around it. Well, can I speak to Colonel Michael? Or, I said, well, yes, but, you know, it's going to appear to be very strange, you know, and they're not going to send me because I'm your riding instructor. She was tearful and made me feel as though I didn't care. But of course I did. I cared, but I couldn't really do much about it. I didn't know what to do. The idea of being in Germany wasn't as horrific as it may first appear, because, let's face it, you know, it wasn't as though we were living together. We were seeing each other 2-3 times a week, perhaps once a week, and that pattern could have continued in Germany.
But the promised visits home were few and far between.
I flew out one weekend to be with him. He gave me a lovely weekend. We had a super time, and I think I might have had an inkling then that things perhaps were cooling it a bit.
After a while, I mean, it just sort of petered out, and I think, you know, I think she felt that I let her down badly by doing that, and I think she was, you know, she needed someone around her, and I wasn't there to be around her.
With her husband now re-established with Camilla Parker Bowles, Diana was alone again. Her next relationship would become public knowledge, detonating an open war between her and Prince Charles, and a crisis for the royal family. By the end of the 1980s, Princess Diana and Prince Charles led separate lives. He spent much of his time with Camilla Parker Bowles. She had recently ended a 3-year love affair with Army officer James Hewitt. Only a handful of people knew about the breakdown of the royal marriage. For years they had kept it secret, but details would soon appear in newspapers, shaking the royal family to the core.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
Diana was a single woman in all but name. Her days were filled with royal duties, usually separate from her husband. In the autumn of 1989, she began a new relationship. Within weeks, news of it reached the news desk of The Sun. A man had a tape of a conversation that he wanted to sell. The deputy editor arranged to meet him in a station car park.
He came and sat in our car, we put the cassette in and listened to it, almost mesmerised for 20 minutes or so.
Just so difficult, so complicated. It makes my life real torture.
To my view, it was clearly her. We had no idea who the man was, and the content was absolutely explosive.
Sad and full of empty. I thought, bloody hell, what have I done for this fucking family?
Eventually, we managed to pin down that the man who was constantly referred to as James on the tape was James Gilby.
You're just the nicest person I know in the world.
James Gilby, of the Gilby gin family, had been one of Diana's teenage boyfriends.
We went to his house early one morning and told him, we've got a tape which we believe contains private conversation between you and the Princess of Wales, in which you repeatedly had called her Squidgy, and it's a fairly intimate conversation, at which point he went completely white, got in his car and drove off.
The Sun decided that the story was too explosive to print and locked the tape in a safe. But Diana soon learned about it and the threat it posed to her public image. She broke contact with Gilby and within a few weeks was back in touch with James Hewitt. He was now commanding a squadron of tanks and had just been ordered to the Gulf, where war was looming.
I was in Germany, and she suddenly rang me out of the blue. She was wondering whether I was going to the Gulf, and so I said yes, I was. And she said she'd like to see me before I went out there. So I went and saw her at Highgrove, and I stayed the night there. So we took up really where we left off, without an if and a but. And then this amazing affair was rekindled, really.
Diana also re-established contact with James Hewitt's family.
I hadn't seen him for several months, and as he was coming back to be at Highgrove with Diana, she said, well, let's have Mother up. And we had a wonderful weekend. It was so nice to be with them. And the boys appeared in their pyjamas and their dressing gowns, and William actually brought supper in on the tray for us.
The Hewitts discovered that Diana had made a big decision.
I know that Diana did not want to be Queen of England. I will never be Queen. She was quite determined. She wanted to get out of the marriage. So for that reason alone, she had no desire to be Queen.
She didn't want the artificialness of what she seemed would be inevitable were she to become Queen. I think she wanted to remain herself.
Diana began to plan an end to her marriage. Her first step concerned money.
I was introduced to Princess Diana in 1990 by one of her close friends who I'd done very well for financially. And she said she wanted me to look after her financial affairs. She wanted to leave the royal family. She wanted to leave their advisors. She wanted to set up on her own. She was thinking of possibly remarrying, moving abroad, maybe having a couple of children. She wanted to have a new life.
When I went to the desert, the affair was conducted with veracity, if you like. The nature of the veracity was the amount of correspondence and depth of feeling that was being transferred between us. She wrote to me every day I was out there, sometimes twice a day.
James Hewitt's letters were sent to Diana via his mother.
On one occasion, she I don't know why, there'd probably been a hold-up with the mail. I think she probably hadn't heard for a couple of days. And she rang me, and I said, yes, I said, letters came this morning. Oh, please, will you read it to me? Will you read them to me? I said, I can't do that. I can't. They're your letters. Please, please, please. She pleaded with me to read these letters, and so I duly opened them and read them to her. And she was happy, and she said, now, please, will you post them today? Today. I said, of course I will.
Back in London, Diana's correspondence caused concern. A senior member of the royal household spoke to her about it. He told this programme,
I said to her that it wasn't a good idea to write letters to James Hewitt. She got upset and cross.
Diana visited the Hewitt family home in Devon.
Sometimes, if she couldn't stand the stress anymore, she would leap into a car, sometimes accompanied by her sons, or either one or the other, and she would drive down just for the day, and obviously it helped.
She sent me bottles of whiskey and hampers from Fortnum and Mason, which was well received and shared amongst my men. And she sent out a parcel of Playboy magazines. They were hugely appreciated.
Throughout this period, whatever her private anxieties, Diana kept up appearances. On a trip to a hospital in Nottingham, she bumped into the family of Dean Woodward, who was in a coma.
Dean's mum said, well, my son's in intensive care, and Diana said, do you mind if I come in? And Dean's mum says, no, not at all. And yeah, you say, I was in a state of shock anyway myself. When she walked in, I was like, oh my God.
How can you feel? Why would somebody like that come to see somebody like me? Come to see Joe Public?
Soon after Dean Woodward recovered consciousness, he got a surprise.
The receptionist came out and she said, Dean, there's a phone call for you. I said, who is it? She said, it's Diane. And I've got a sister, Diane. And I said, oh, tell her I'm having my dinner to call back later. She went away, come back. She said, oh, she can't call back. So I went in, stopped my dinner, went and spoke on the phone. And then I said, oh, hello, my duck, because I had a tracheotomy. I could talk then. And then she said, do you know who you're talking to? I said, yeah, Diane. And she said, no, you're talking to Princess Diana from Kensington Palace. Unbelievable.
In February 1991, James Hewitt led 15 British tanks into battle. For his courage under fire, he was mentioned in dispatches. He was also mentioned in the News of the World.
The first I knew about it was, somebody handing it to me and saying, look at this. And I said, oh my goodness.
These were the first details of Diana's love life to be printed in a national newspaper, although the paper only hinted at the extent of her relationship with Hewitt.
I used the army phone to ring her up. She said, don't worry. I said, don't worry. I mean, it's easier said than done. As soon as I got back, I went and saw her, went and stayed. And we didn't really sort of speak too much about it. There was too much else to catch up on.
After the news of the world's scoop, Hewitt's every step was dogged by reporters. Privacy with Diana was impossible.
Publicity killed the relationship. It was impossible to carry on as we had been in that environment. I tried to contact her, and then, you know, as soon as I realised my calls weren't being returned, you know, I knew, you know, I'd been there before, so it was plain to see.
Diana now faced the risk that 2 damaging stories about her could be printed. More details of her affair with Hewitt and the tape of her conversation with James Gilby. She set out to tell the world a different story and put her version of her marriage on the record first.
She planned it, but she wanted to look as if she was the goodie and the royal family were the baddies.
To tell the world her story, Diana turned to a journalist she'd been on friendly terms with for years.
I vividly remember the first time Diana and Andrew Morton met. It was at a cocktail party, I think in Spain or somewhere like that. And Diana immediately seemed to be interested in him. She was toying with his tie and making comments about what a bright pattern it was. From then on, Andrew always wore loudly patterned ties.
At these receptions, it was all lively, joshing and very friendly.
But it gave her an excuse to get close to him. She picked up his tie and pulled him towards her, and we were all standing back, amazed, gobsmacked. And the press officer, who was standing nearby, said, "God, I think I'll have to get a bucket of water and throw over them."
In 1991, Andrew Morton wrote detailed stories about Diana's marriage. They included strong hints about Charles and Camilla and were unusually well sourced.
For the first time, Diana had a voice, and trust was beginning to be built up between myself, Diana's circle, and, obliquely, Diana herself.
Morton had grown friendly with one of Diana's closest advisors, Dr. James Colthurst. In the spring of 1991, Colthurst invited Morton to join him for breakfast.
Over a plate of bacon and eggs in a transport cafe in North Ruislip in North London, well away from prying eyes, we just chatted about Diana's life.
Morton had been writing about Diana for some years, but Colthurst told him details that no journalist had heard before.
How she would run out of the room when Prince Charles arrived in the room. How she was in a bad way, mentally. And of course, the thing which really riled her most of all was that she was living a lie in terms of her marriage. And some of her friends really felt that she was on the verge of committing suicide. I remember thinking to myself, this is Walter Mitty land.
Morton was already planning to write a book about Diana. He and Colthurst discussed whether she would give him an interview. It was a risky idea. Diana liked it, but hesitated. And so Colthurst suggested that she consult a friend of his.
James Colthurst, who was a good friend of mine, at the time approached me out of the blue and said, how do you fancy doing an astrological reading for Diana? And I looked at him and I thought, you're winding me up, aren't you? But no, he meant it.
One afternoon, Diana came to James Colthurst's house for the first of 2 consultations with Felix Lyle.
Diana was thinking about doing a book, basically the revenge of the princess. And she wanted some astrological advice on it. There were doubts. She had serious worries and reservations about it. We talked through that, we talked about the possibilities and the mudslinging that would come out as a result of it. She asked me, well, what do you think? What are the auguries? I said, well, there's scandal here. Neptune was playing devious game, and also Pluto was playing a very strong role, and so there was complete transformation. In a way, she felt, well, if this is what's happening anyhow, I might as well facilitate it. And we smiled and said, well, that's it then. The book is going ahead. And I just think she wanted some form of external confirmation. Why she saw the stars as holding the secret to her, I don't really know.
If she'd come to somebody like me or others and said, do you think we should do this? Do you think this is a good idea? We would have all said no, or I would have done anyway, and that was not what she wanted to hear. So she went ahead anyway because she was an instinctive creature.
Andrew Morton sent Diana questions. During evenings alone, she responded, recording her answers on tape, her version of her unhappy marriage. She accused the royal family of disliking her popularity.
There was immense jealousy because every single day I was on the front of the newspapers.
She said she'd spent hours alone wondering where her husband was, causing her depression and bulimia.
I had so many dreams as a young girl that my husband would look after me, encourage me, but I didn't get any of that.
She accused Prince Charles of neglecting her and resuming his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles.
The worst day of my life, realizing that Charles had gone back to Camilla.
No royal writer had ever been handed such material, an attack on the character of the future king direct from his future queen. Every few days, Colthurst handed the tapes to Morton and returned with a fresh list of questions.
He said, I got the whole thing rolling. The whole thing was rolling. The information was being gathered. She gave a lot. James was the centrepiece. He was the linchpin for the whole thing. I mean, it was a very slick operation because Morton never had to meet her.
Recording tapes for Andrew Morton was not Diana's only unroyal activity.
And a car pulled up, and that's when it hit me. I thought, God, she's really coming to the house.
And I looked out the window and I could see her get out of a Jaguar, I think she had, yeah, XJS. And she come down the drive, and then she came in with her arms open. Gave my mum a hug, and hello, Ivy, first name terms. Hello, Ivy, hello, John, to my dad. And then she said, oh, I'm sorry I'm late.
I'm sorry I'm late, we got awfully long. Hello,
And she says to Dean, oh, it's nice to see you now you've got your clothes on. So we all had a laugh about that. She broke the ice. She didn't make you feel uncomfortable or anything. She'd been there half an hour, and outside the street was becoming crowded. You know, word had got round.
She was shocked to see that, because she didn't come for that. She came for me and my family. Not papers, not cameras, not public. I wasn't interested in the royals, but ever since Princess Diana did what she did for me and my family, I've not been a royalist, but I've definitely closed #1 Dianarist if there was a Dianarist. Definitely.
The Dianarists were soon buying copies of the Sunday Times, which in June 1992 printed long extracts from Andrew Morton's book. Supporters of the royal family launched a counterattack.
I think the public have been outraged by the intrusive nature of the authors and the journalists concerned.
Andrew Morton knew that he was on his own. Diana would deny helping him.
She had total, utter deniability, so that I would take the flak for it. It would be my responsibility. Some of her friends would bear the burden of it as well, and that was it. And she could then say to the Queen, say to Prince Charles, say to the Prime Minister, nothing to do with me.
Palace officials passed on Diana's denials to the government and the press. Morton's book was soon being widely dismissed. Max Hastings, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, didn't believe a word of it.
Now, we're dealing here with a book by somebody called Andrew Morton, whose only credentials is that he was a royal reporter. Now, I'm bound to say that royal reporters, if you can't get a job as a pianist in a brothel, you become a royal reporter.
With the book facing ridicule, Diana decided she must publicly support it. She visited one of those whose help Andrew Morton had acknowledged, Caroline Bartholomew, and someone called the papers.
And I got a phone call saying the Princess of Wales is at Caroline's house. Caroline, one of her flatmates. So I shot round there. The door opened up, sharp on 9 o'clock. Diana stepped out, looked up at me, kissed Caroline on both cheeks, kissed the baby, and kissed Caroline's husband. Looked up to see if I was shooting. Walked to the car and looked at me all the way up the street as she drove towards me, giving me a full chance to get more photographs.
The reason was very simple, to show the world that Diana gave support to those friends who'd stuck their neck out to speak to me.
It was significant that whoever told me was able to tell me when the Princess of Wales was leaving. Lots of people know when somebody's arriving someplace. It was very difficult to guess when somebody's leaving. Well, I only know who phoned me. And I'm not telling you.
This was the hinge of Diana's life. She had publicly endorsed an onslaught on the Prince of Wales. She had broken the most basic rule of the monarchy.
One of the things that really has made the royal family work over so many years is the discretion and the fact that their friends, they never talk to the media, and their friends never talk to them, and they are surrounded by this complete wall of loyalty and trust. And to have one of their own members with a regular hotline to Andrew Morton or whoever it was absolutely devastating for them.
In the book, which she had read in draft and approved, Diana painted Prince Charles as a selfish, lazy man who would rather play polo than spend time with his sons.
It had spite built into it, and I think in some way it satisfied her need for revenge. Part of me felt a little bit ashamed of that, actually, and I just felt that maybe I should have rethought my strategy originally.
As soon as Prince Charles's friends realised they could not dismiss Morton's book as ill-informed, they set out to rebut it detail by detail. Several contacted writer Penny Junor.
I think Morton's book is 100% credible as Diana's version of her story. I think it is 50%, maybe 99% inaccurate in terms of what actually happened.
Diana later backed away from some of the stories she had told Andrew Morton. In particular, Morton had published Diana's account of how at Sandringham, when 3 months pregnant with Prince William,
standing at the top of the wooden staircase, she hurled herself to the ground, landing in a heap at the bottom.
There was a part in the book about her trying to commit suicide, but she told me that she'd merely slipped and fallen down the stairs, and there was no suicide attempt at all. I'm sure of that.
I knew about the throwing down the stairs because I knew someone had witnessed it, so I knew that wasn't quite true.
Diana had launched the first open attack in a war of exaggeration and malice. It would soon escalate out of all control. As Diana and Charles fired broadsides at each other through the press, their supporters tried to find out what might appear next. Camilla Parker Bowles spoke regularly to The Sun.
We had a very civilised relationship over the phone. We met a couple of times. She really became a very, very, almost like an unofficial advisor, if you like, or unofficial shield to all the gossip. And I think in hindsight, and this is not any kind of insult to her, she got as much from me as I got from her, because every time I called her, I would tell her, well, you know, you've heard this, and this is incredible. And she would say, no, I've not heard that. And then she would say, well, it's totally untrue. And of course, everything was totally untrue.
I'll wield my bullwhip at you in a minute.
They were very aware of the rumours that the media had hold of, and really what newspapers were contemplating publishing about the marriage.
In August 1992, Stuart Higgins decided that so much was now known about the problems in Diana's marriage that it was safe to publish her taped conversation with James Gilby.
It's just so difficult difficult, so complicated. He makes my life real torture.
Apart from some of the material at the beginning of the tape, which we thought was rather tasteless and offensive, we published every word and put it on a 0898 number for people to listen to as well.
Diana had recorded her story for Andrew Morton, partly to limit the damage the Gilby tape could do her. And she succeeded. In opinion polls, her popularity rating remained high. The Queen pressed the couple to make a final effort. But during an official tour to Korea, they made a gloomy pair. When they returned, it was all over.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
Between Charles's friends and Diana's, the divide now became total.
You were either in one camp or you were in the other. You couldn't really be in both. I can think of very few examples of those who were in both. And the tendency clearly was to drive the two people at the very centre of the drama apart.
Around London's most elegant dinner tables, a social war was raging. Lord Palumbo had been one of Charles's friends since the Prince was 16, but by now he was on the Princess's side.
Oh, the warfare is total in such circumstances. The warfare is very nasty and very deep and very bitter.
In public terms, there was supposed to be a dignified silence, but quite clearly the friends that the Prince had were very influential, had good contacts with the media. They took the opportunity to say that this was the Princess's fault. When I was told one day that the Princess is clinically mad and needs treatment.
The Princess was unbalanced, the Princess was this, the Princess was that, she was unstable, she was bulimic, she was so on and so forth. And similarly damaging things about the Prince of Wales and his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles.
In the aftermath of Andrew Morton's book, newspapers dug up more details about Prince Charles's affair. The Prince's circle issued an absolute denial to the press.
They are very close, but are nothing other than very good friends. It is Diana's obsession that makes it sound otherwise.
But then a man from Chester called the Daily Mirror. He too had a tape.
I can't bear a Sunday night without you.
Oh, God. Sometimes I need you several times a week.
So do I. I need you all the week, all the time.
The Mirror's publication of this tape proved that Diana's complaint about Camilla was not just an obsession.
Then you realise that actually Diana, far from being potty, her suspicions were absolutely correct, and that they had been arranging these meetings. They had been at friends, but people that she considered to be friends of her and Charles, who were playing a double game.
But it is highly appropriate that the conference should hear first from Turning Point's very active and involved patron, who will probably not mind if I describe her as one of us. A wife and a mother and a daughter and a friend and someone who's known problems in life of her own and has courageously used...
Diana became a symbol of the abused woman who had conquered despair and fought back. She addressed women's support groups, making speeches that hinted at personal experience.
As their world closes in on them, their self-esteem evaporates into a haze of loneliness and desperation as they retreat further and further from those who could help them.
The outside world also took Diana's side. Her solo visits drew far more attention than those of her royal relatives.
She was incredibly charismatic. I defy anybody to say they have met her and not been bowled over by the charisma that she just oozed.
Although Diana was semi-detached from the royal family, world leaders queued up to receive her. And she also charmed big business.
There was one particular case where a multinational whom I'd been trying to court for 6 years and not been very successful suddenly decided they'd like to support us. So she really had the ability to attract ordinary people people who were in positions of authority and the media, and that combination was dynamite for a charity.
Diana made numerous visits to New York, her new favourite city, where she was idolised by high society and the glossy magazines.
For Vanity Fair, Diana was, it's an icon of a period in time, an international symbol, the likes of which you get, maybe 3 or 4 times a century. Nobody knows anything about who does or doesn't sell, but when she was alive, she sold.
Diana was a superstar who, it seemed, could connect with anybody.
She'd stopped off for a night at the Carlisle Hotel in New York, got up to her room when the phone rang, and the switchboard said, "Is that the Princess of Wales?" "Yes." "Well, there's a man on the phone says he's your husband, and says he's calling from a payphone down the street. His name's Charles Windsor." And she took the call. And she'd clearly worked out that some enterprising figure on the street had seen her flit from limo to lobby and thought, "My God, was that who I thought it was?" Put through the call, and she had apparently a fascinating 40-minute conversation with whoever this was. And what she particularly liked, and we all laughed about enormously afterwards, was the fact that this guy would then reel into a bar and say, "You never guess who I've just been talking to on the phone." And everyone would say, "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of Sheba."
Diana's chilly relations with the palace made no difference to her popularity. Royal Ascot brought her no invitation, and so she drove her sons to Planet Hollywood. As her relatives rode in a carriage, Diana upstaged them once again. Charles's camp was planning to relaunch the prince. Charles helped reporter Jonathan Dimbleby make a 2.5-hour documentary about him. On the night the programme was shown on ITV, Diana set her video and went out to a Vanity Fair party at the Serpentine Gallery in London.
When her car drew up and she leapt out of it in the most amazing way and rushed up to me.
She looked fabulous, and nobody was going to talk about it, and I don't think anybody knew what he was going to say on TV that night.
Diana's hosts included a prominent critic of the royal family.
I went up to be introduced, so I said, "It's delightful to meet you, and we Republicans must stick together," and she laughed prettily. When large men closed in on me and said, "What on earth do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, she's done more to bring about a republic by apparently not trying than I ever have by trying, and I felt it was only fair to compliment her on it." She seemed to get the joke anyway.
She was the life and soul of the party, wearing this fabulous dress, which everybody noticed.
But it has occurred to me since that what she was thinking was, if I do this right, my ghastly hubby's interview with Dimbleby will not be on page 1 tomorrow, but I will be. "Di knocks 'em dead at Serpentine Bash," a kind of headline.
Diana returned to her video recorder to discover that in front of 14 million viewers, Prince Charles had admitted his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles.
Mrs. Parker Bowles is a great friend of mine, and she has been a friend for a very long time, and along with a lot of other friends, and will continue to be a friend for a very long time.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down. Us both having tried.
Charles's admission further damaged his popularity. Diana was still winning the War of the Waleses, but her husband's allies were about to launch a counterattack. As a confident, stylish princess was conquering the globe, in London, Prince Charles's friends and allies were describing her quite differently. They spoke in particular to 2 sympathetic writers, Penny Junor and Jonathan Dimbleby. Dimbleby, one of Britain's most respected television reporters, was now working on a book about Prince Charles, a book with impeccable sources, Charles's closest friends.
The friends were very protective of the prince and very distressed that he had been attacked by Diana when they had seen the way she had behaved.
Charles's friends gave Dimbleby dramatic and highly critical accounts of Diana's behaviour, mostly drawn from the early years of the royal marriage. They said she was obsessive, frightening and unhinged, that she listened at doors and steamed open letters.
When he was first told about the way Diana behaved, I think he did think, you know, I'm being told this by friends of the prince, and this marriage has broken down, and this is just one lot slagging off the other side.
Charles's friends told Dimbleby that Diana had shouted and had run out of the room, threatened her husband, raged at him.
Dimbleby did eventually come to believe what he was hearing.
Jonathan Dimbleby took his interview notes and consulted medical textbooks. There he learnt that the behaviour described to him suggested the symptoms of a psychiatric illness called borderline personality disorder. In a letter, he told the makers of this program,
I stumbled across the term borderline personality disorder in a variety of psychiatric journals while researching the symptoms of the princess's self-acknowledged condition, bulimia. I discovered that the two disorders are often associated with each other.
Dimbleby discussed Diana's alleged symptoms with two psychiatrists, but he did not reveal that she was the subject of his inquiries. One of the psychiatrists was Dr. Paul Aylard, brother of Prince Charles's own private secretary, Richard Aylard. Dimbleby then wrote a chapter for his book, arguing that Diana's behaviour was indicative of borderline personality disorder. But was Diana, so serene and accomplished on the international stage, really suffering from a mental illness? Her friends thought not, but even they saw that months of open conflict had changed her.
When she moved out of Highgrove, she found some of Prince Charles's possessions, and she had a bonfire, and she put them on the bonfire. She was very vengeful.
She was very wary of people. Very wary. If you weren't 100% for her, at her disposal, and to do what she wanted, when she wanted it, life could become very difficult.
Diana parted company with some close allies at this time. One was the man who had helped organise Andrew Morton's book, James Colthurst.
In the end, there was a parting of the ways, and a painful one. So James became ostracised, he sort of became a pariah. He said that she used to refer to him as that, which I think is a great shame, really, and an end to a rather sad story.
But did Diana's displays of temper and mistrust mean that she was mentally ill? When it was published, Jonathan Dimbleby's book pointed firmly towards the conclusion that she was.
Her general demeanour seemed like something out of a nightmare, beyond all reason and out of control.
But Dimbleby did not go the whole way. After consultations with Prince Charles, he deleted all explicit references to borderline personality disorder from his book, and he dropped the chapter that focused on the disorder. He told this program,
I came to the conclusion that any conceivable link between bulimia and borderline personality disorder was too speculative.
But what Dimbleby had begun, others would take further. Penny Junor was one of the first to write in detail about Diana and borderline personality disorder.
Dimbleby helped me come to the syndrome. There were several people actually who had mentioned borderline personality disorder. Dimbleby was one of them. And when I then researched the subject further, I mean, I discovered that actually it was absolutely spot on for the kind of behaviour that Diana exhibited.
A psychiatrist and friend of Diana thinks otherwise.
In my 32 years as a consultant psychiatrist, I've treated many patients with borderline personality disorder. And it's a very serious, lifelong, pervasive condition. I met Princess Diana and I spoke to her, and she was able to perform extremely well in all areas of her life that the public knew about. And my professional opinion is it would not have been possible for her to meet with heads of state, to assume all these responsibilities that she did all over the world if she had a serious personality disorder.
I mean, I'm not a psychologist, I just know that she was in many ways, a very ordinary, natural person to be with. Yes, like everybody, she had her moments when she was upset, but she also regarded her work as a job, so that for 99% of the time she was able to handle her own feelings.
I think she learned to handle herself. And if you're going against the nasty boys, you've got to learn how to handle yourself. But I remember a kind, gentle, sympathetic, loving person who was changed by the position she found herself in.
You only have to say somebody's unbalanced or mentally unstable, and it's a dreadful thing to say, because even if it's not true, it sticks.
Another series of newspaper stories added to Diana's problems. James Hewitt had told his story to the writer of a bestseller called Princess in Love. Hewitt had been paid.
Yes, I was paid for an interview. I regret that very much. I don't see that it makes that much difference whether one was paid or not. The fact that I did it at all, I regret, and it was a mistake. Had one not made the mistake, for all probably the right reasons, but it was a mistake nevertheless, things would have panned out differently for me, I'm sure. You know, I tried to rectify a situation, and it went wrong. I don't think it's damaged anybody, particularly other than myself.
One evening in the autumn of 1995, a camera crew arrived in secret at Kensington Palace. For months, the papers had been filled with damaging stories about Diana's love life and her state of mind. She was beginning to lose public support, and so she had decided to use the most powerful medium in the world to settle her conflict with Prince Charles once and for all.
She won't go quietly, that's the problem. I'll fight till the end, because I believe that I have a role to fulfill. And I got 2 children to bring up.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Diana also responded to her critics. In the previous months, newspapers had reported that she had made obsessive phone calls to a married art dealer.
There were also a series of telephone calls which allegedly were made by you to a Mr. Oliver Hoare. Did you make what were described as nuisance phone calls?
I was reputed to have made 300 telephone calls in a very short space of time, which, bearing my lifestyle at that time, made me a very busy lady. No, I didn't, but that again was a huge move to discredit me, and very nearly did me in, the injustice of it.
Diana told me that she made probably 300 or 400 telephone calls to Oliver Hoare. She made them from phone boxes, from different addresses. She wore disguises to go to the phone boxes. She wore gloves, and she really covered her tracks, but she did make the phone calls. If he didn't answer the phone, she normally put the phone down.
Had you made any of those calls at all?
I used to, yes, I had rung up, yes.
Once, twice, 3 times?
I don't know, but it was a period of 6 to 9 months. A few times, but certainly not an obsessive manner, no.
She was actually worried that she might be arrested and charged with making nuisance calls.
The most devastating moment of Diana's interview came when she talked about her husband's future.
Do you think he would wish to be king?
There was always conflict on that subject with him when we discussed it. And I understood that conflict because it's a very demanding role, being Prince of Wales, but it's equally a more demanding role being king. And being Prince of Wales produces more freedom now, and being king would be a little bit more suffocating. And because I know the character, I would think that the top job, as I call it, would bring enormous limitations to him. And I don't know whether he could adapt to that.
It gave ammunition to those people who opposed her unnecessarily.
Good evening. So the Princess of Wales does not expect...
Newsnight had gathered together a group to discuss Diana's interview immediately after it was broadcast. She was represented by Anthony Holden and Charles by Government Minister Nicholas Soames, one of his closest friends.
I think we were all in our different ways thinking, well, she's not going to say anything very interesting.
Did your relationship go beyond a close friendship?
Yes, it did. Yes.
Wait a minute, did she just admit adultery with Hewitt?
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him. But I was very let down.
My God, and this programme, for us as for everybody, moved into a different stratosphere. And when she came up with, well, I want to be Queen of Hearts, I want to be Queen of People's Hearts, Nicky Soames, by this time getting very indignant, said, I bet you wrote that, Holden. And sure, he let rip.
It really is the sort of advanced stages of paranoia.
So she's made it all up? She's paranoid?
I've simply an idea, but it seems to me like the advanced stages of paranoia.
Seeing him and hearing him say this publicly, I felt was a pretty important development. There he was going out on a limb on behalf of his prince. It seemed to me that this was the end game.
And I'm sure that those people who were advising the Prince of Wales said, I told you so. That's what she's all about.
After 2 years of gossip and exaggeration, this was the last straw. For Diana and Charles, divorce was now inevitable.
The princess talked to me on occasion about what might have been, and that prompted me to feel, perhaps wrongly, that there was some hope. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The two camps had become so entrenched and so deeply divided, and the feeling so bitter, that it was not possible to find any common ground.
In March 1995, Diana enjoyed a long weekend in the French capital.
We were staying in Paris, and Prince William and Prince Harry were there as well. And miraculously, we remained unobserved for 2 days, during which we had a wonderful time, because we were able to wander about completely incognito, go up the Eiffel Tower, do all the tourist things that, you know, everybody does. But after 2 days, the press spotted us. We were having breakfast at a wonderful shop called Dalloyau, and the princess insisted on sitting in the window. And sure enough, there were 2 members of the press outside. And she shut the curtains so they couldn't see her. And then finally she drew back the curtain so they could see her. It was a sort of cat and mouse peep show game that was going on.
For years, Diana had been protected by royal bodyguards. But she said she found their presence intrusive and wanted to get rid of them.
People like me always tell her, don't be ridiculous, look what happened to Greta Garbo. You don't want to wind up in a headscarf hiding in doorways in Manhattan. There is no way, you know, you should not dispense with the protection officers.
But Diana was determined. And so instead of close protection, she got close-up photography.
did get more aggressive for her, because there was no one to say, stand back, boys. And there was no one with that little hint of authority in her voice to make sure that if you didn't stand back, you were going to have your collar filled.
My God, the prices of the pictures was going through the roof. If Princess Diana is going to be photographed getting a bargain ticket, what else can we get? So suddenly, sitting on the Princess Diana's tail for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, became very much worth it.
There was one photographer in particular who used to really speak to the princess in the most appalling way. He talked about her as the loon, meaning she was crazy.
The photographer who coined the phrase was Mark Saunders.
As an in-joke, you would say, is it a loony lunch? Which would mean, what's the situation? Is it all clear today, or is she in a bad mood? And if the answer was, yep, it's Looney Tunes, that meant keep a low profile. It was genuinely a term of endearment, a laugh, an in-joke. She got into a taxi and put her head down between her legs. And one of the Spanish photographers said, why don't you put your head up and start acting like a princess? And I myself, as a photographer, was there, was part of that. And that's certainly not something I would look back on with any sort of pride.
Out. O-U-T, out.
Have a nice trip, ma'am.
America was the only place Diana felt safe from press harassment. She said she felt at home there, and even talked of moving there to live. Her closest friend, Brazilian Lucia Flecha de Lima, had left London for America, and Diana was a regular visitor.
I really loved her as a daughter, and she was a most wonderful friend to me. She brought a lot of joy, of light, of laughter, of dramas into my life. She made me feel young again. She made me feel her age. We would share things.
Flecha de Lima believed Diana needed more support in America, someone else she could trust. Over a series of lunches, Lucia auditioned a potential confidant for the princess.
Over a period of about 9 months, Lucia told me quite a few controversial things that people could have sold to the tabloids and all sorts of things, and I think they tested me.
Discretion and reliability were the main qualities put to the test.
After that, Lucia called me up one day and said, would I consent to being the friend of the Princess of Wales? And I said to her I was deeply, deeply honoured, and that I would never let her down, and that I would be a loyal and terrific friend and always be there for her. And she said, Lana, we know an awful lot about you, and Diana will be so delighted.
Fashion designer and businesswoman Lana Marks, with her Hollywood and White House connections, moved in the same circles as Diana. And above all, she was completely trustworthy.
I would bring her for lunch, and we had a great variety of conversations. Some of them were very serious, and others were just two girlfriends having been to a charity event the night before and chatting about who was wearing what and who said what to who, and just a load of fun.
Back in London, while visiting a friend, a patient at the Brompton Hospital, Diana met his surgeon, Hasnat Khan. He had left his native Pakistan to study under Britain's leading heart specialist.
Diana told me that Hasnat Khan was a wonderful gentleman who came into her life when she was most vulnerable and needing somebody who could give her security, who could help her through this very difficult time when she was breaking up with Prince Charles.
The doctor hated publicity, and Diana went to great lengths to keep their relationship a secret.
She used to wear disguises, she used to wear wigs. And they went out all over the country. She went out to Ronnie Scott's club with Hasnat Khan, wearing a wig. She wasn't detected.
Some newspapers learned about Diana's secret life. but they didn't get the full story.
There was one particular occasion where she gave an exclusive to the Sunday papers to say that she'd been visiting patients at the Brompton Hospital. In fact, she hadn't spent the whole evening at the Brompton Hospital. She'd spent some of it at Hasna Khan's flat. And she told me, whatever happened, please don't say anything about it. So when I was asked about it, I said that, no, as far as I know, she'd spent the whole time at the Brompton Hospital.
Diana was in the midst of difficult divorce negotiations. She wanted the press on her side. So she hired a media advisor.
I'm absolutely delighted. I think it's going to be very difficult, but very good and hard work.
The situation when I arrived there in January '96 was that most of the journalists themselves didn't believe what she was saying, didn't trust, the messages that were put out, because she had tried to manipulate them too often.
Together, Diana and Atkinson launched a charm offensive on editors and writers.
Chatting with Diana was a revelation because she was very candid, surprisingly candid. She called Buckingham Palace the leper colony, and if you wanted to know what she thought about the Queen Mother, she called the Queen Mother the chief leper in the leper colony.
Diana went beyond nasty nicknames with Tiggy Leg Burke, the nanny Prince Charles employed to look after his sons. When Tiggy was spotted pouring champagne for Prince William at a school picnic, Diana instructed her office to brief the press.
We ran a story about what the princess had said about Tiggy Leg Burke, and the next day she went completely potty and said, "I never said that." Her aides rang up and they had clearly been told by the princess, "Get on the phone there and give that Higgins bloke a bollocking now." And they were in the invidious position of having to say, that is totally untrue. The princess can't understand why you wrote that. You know, you've met her, you've seen her, and all that. And I said, "But you know it's true. You told me."
Let's go. 3 months into the job, I realised that it was not perhaps as easy as I thought it was going to be. My client was far more mercurial than I had thought.
Diana's work with AIDS sufferers had established her reputation as a humanitarian. She agreed to open a new AIDS clinic, but then she met Aileen Getty, the daughter of the American billionaire John Paul Getty Jr.
I got into the department and found a message to say that Diana had decided that she was going to bring Aileen Getty. Now, Aileen Getty was a high-profile American with HIV and AIDS who had just hit London, was travelling around every television and radio studio in the capital talking about HIV and AIDS, had latched on to Diana. Diana was bringing her and Aileen Getty's entourage.
She, through meetings with Aileen Getty, was persuaded that this was a huge opportunity to broaden the objective, to draw attention to women and AIDS.
So I can remember ringing up Jane Atkinson and going bananas down the phone, sort of saying, "It's not a zoo. She can't just bring all these people in. These are patients that we're dealing with."
And he was very angry, and he did shout at me down the telephone as to how I could have allowed this. So I told him to speak to her directly.
Diana came on and I said, "Ma'am, listen, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter to me whether you come or not, OK? It really doesn't matter, but I'm not having you treating us in this way. I'm quite happy to call it all off now." She said, "Oh, Michael, you must trust me. It'll all be all right." Anyway, she arrived, and we had got the whole thing worked out. Aileen Getty would be sort of taken by one of us, sat at the back of this room, Diana sitting in the front. I got up, having sat next to Diana, and Diana went like that to Aileen Getty. Aileen Getty came from the back of the room to the front of the room.
The princess motioned Aileen to sit very close to her. She held hands with Aileen all the way through, and that was the photograph that got used.
This was Diana's last appearance for the charity. She had lost the trust of Britain's leading AIDS specialist.
Because she was trying to sort so many other things out in her life, she became distracted by that. It became very difficult to know that she would deliver on things that you would ask her to do. To be quite honest, by the end of her life, we hardly asked her to do anything. It just wasn't worth it.
In July 1996, the divorce was settled. The removal of Diana's title, Her Royal Highness, sparked massive press attention. A day later, she cut her ties with 100 charities, keeping only 6. Diana had been planning her move for months.
I don't think that I and her staff ever thought there was a good time for her to do it. We always knew that it was going to be a negative media story. She tried, I think, to do it as a story which would give her some sympathy for losing the HRH title.
Some newspapers followed Diana's line, but most didn't.
She was very angry because the media had been very negative to her. And I explained that I had only answered the questions in the way that we'd agreed. And she said that, accused me of not doing so. And then one of her friends was on the 10 o'clock news.
Earlier, Diana's close friend Rosa Monckton spoke exclusively to ITN about how the princess was feeling.
We rang Rosa Monckton, and surprisingly she said, well, I'll ring you back. And I thought, oh, there's only one thing happening there. She must presumably be going to check with the princess. She did ring back quite quickly. I think it was about 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, and agreed to do the interview.
She would like to be much more in the front line, I suspect, with fewer charities and do a lot more.
When I rang the princess and asked her if she knew her friend was on the news, she said, no, she didn't know, but you can't, I think her words were, you can't always stop your friends talking. But then I discovered afterwards her friend had actually talked to the princess about it. So it was, you know, it's impossible for me to do my job in an environment like that, and I came quite clearly to see that.
After only 8 months, Jane Atkinson quit, the latest in a series of advisors to resign. In the face of difficulties at home, Diana increasingly turned away from Britain, both for her personal and her public life. She was a fixture on the American charity scene, where her presence guaranteed flattering press coverage and huge donations. New York society turned out to attend a dinner at which the princess was to receive the Humanitarian of the Year award.
There were any number of celebrities in this town who actually had offered to up their donations. I mean, there's one gentleman who offered to up his donation from, he used to buy a $10,000 table at our dinner, and asked if he could donate $50,000, but the caveat was that he had to sit next to the princess on the dais, which we declined, actually. The evening wore on, and Dr. Kissinger gave the princess her award, and what she talked about was not herself or the organization, but what it meant to be a volunteer.
I think of the parents who this very night are standing around a hospital bed, not knowing if their child will wake in the morning.
And a woman actually who was sitting in the audience somewhat near me, much to my dismay, actually yelled out to her, "Where are your children, Diana?" At that moment, a hush came over the crowd, and she simply looked to the back of the room and said,
"At school."
And proceeded on with the rest of her speech, for which she got a standing ovation.
Diana's grace under pressure was one reason she was such a solid gold fundraiser.
In a jaded world, you're always looking for somebody that's just trying to go out and make a difference. Our average dinner probably averaged 1.2 million. That night, our dinner was $2.2 million. And we've never come close to it since, nor do I expect to.
Diana could generate charities an extra $1 million an evening, but she wanted more, an official role. She approached the Prime Minister, John Major.
Diana wanted to be an ambassador for the United Kingdom. She invited John Major to discuss it with him, and he agreed it would be a good idea.
Shortly after their discussion, Diana attended a meeting of Centrepoint, a charity for the homeless, to make a speech.
She had a huge goggle factor. You know, people wanted to see her, and that in itself meant that she could head up an organisation like Centrepoint.
I'm appalled at the dangers young people face on the streets and how vulnerable they are to exploitation.
Diana shared the platform with an opposition MP, the Shadow Home Secretary, Jack Straw. She found herself at the centre of a political storm.
It became a huge furore. It was talked about in the Houses of Parliament, and you know, Centrepoint's name was. We'd politicised the royal family, apparently, by actually getting her to talk about youth homelessness.
Well, over now to our political editor, Michael Brunson. Michael, is there some anxiety that she's something of a loose cannon?
There's a great division tonight among Tory MPs and among some Labour MPs too, and Liberal Democrats as well, about exactly how the Princess is going to go forward from this point onwards.
Just 2 days before, the Queen had discussed Diana's ambassadorial role with John Major.
He had to get permission from the royal family, and they blocked it. And I was there on the morning that she got a fax saying that unfortunately she couldn't be an ambassador for the United Kingdom. And she was absolutely furious. She was really, really cross. She started screaming and said, "I can't understand why they treat me like this."
But Diana would not be thwarted. When she learned the Red Cross was conducting a worldwide campaign to ban landmines, she asked if she could visit Angola, the most mined country in the world.
She did call me to say, what should she wear? I have to say I found that highly amusing, as even my wife wouldn't ask that question of me, but I told her what I was going to wear. I mean, chino trousers and an open-neck shirt, and that the staff with me would be wearing the same kind of thing, because we were going into some pretty dirty, some pretty awful places.
The welcoming party included experienced war reporters.
I was very cynical about Diana, and I thought the trip was important because I'd worked a lot as a correspondent covering the issue of landmines in Mozambique and Angola, which her trip was meant to highlight. But I just saw it as a big publicity stunt, another chance for her to be photographed in front of victims looking beautiful.
It's an enormous privilege for me to have been invited here to Angola in order to assist the Red Cross in its campaign to ban once and for all anti-personal landmines.
Diana's call for a worldwide ban upset a member of the British government. Once again, she found herself at the centre of a political row.
Ma'am, the government minister's home has said you're a loose cannon by supporting this campaign. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, Jenny, I'm only trying to highlight a problem that's going on all around the world. That's all.
Her reaction was really one of astonishment. I mean, why is this being said? Why are people wanting to do this? What do I have to do?
So that was...
Oh, I really make you burst into tears now.
Don't worry.
Who said I'm a loose cannon?
If you try and think, who in the world would you identify who could give a very simple global message and get people to listen and take notice? Well, I can't think of anybody even now that would do that. Not a single individual. And she did it on that visit without any question whatsoever.
Diana's visit increased pressure on governments to sign up to a worldwide treaty. banning landmines.
Angola's probably one of the few places she could go to, and people really had no idea who she was. She went to some of the bedsides, and I actually interpreted for her because I speak Portuguese.
What's happened here?
And there was a little girl lying who was clearly in a terrible condition. All her insides were hanging out, and she caught the attention of Princess Diana, who started asking her questions.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why presumably she's lost the weight that she has. She's lost the weight because she can't take in nutrition.
I think that's enough.
She eats, but...
After she'd moved on, I stayed and just asked the girl a few more questions. And she said to me, "Who is that?" And I said, "She's a princess from England, from far away." And she said to me, "Is she an angel?" And I found that really moving. This little girl probably died a few hours after that. I know she died. And it somehow seemed nice that that was the last thing that she saw, was this beautiful lady that she thought was an angel. She had this kind of aura about her, which I've only seen really, I would say, with Nelson Mandela. She somehow managed to transmit to them this feeling of really caring what had happened. It didn't seem cynical at all once you were actually there with her. I was very impressed. It changed my view of her.
In May 1997, Diana arrived in Pakistan. Her trip was ostensibly to visit the cancer hospital run by her friend, Imran Khan, and his British wife, Jemima. But her real reason was to meet the family of her lover, Hasnat Khan.
I think she would have come anyway, but also I think she felt that it was a good chance, a good opportunity to meet Dr. Hasnat's family. She'd been involved with him for 2 years, and Princess Diana wanted to marry him. And she really, she had decided that he was the man.
But Hasnat's family were divided, and he refused to commit to Diana.
She went from great joy to great despair. Sometimes she said, "Oh God, it's never going to work. He doesn't want to see me anymore."
I had it in my mind that I was going to talk to him, because having married someone from outside my culture, maybe if there was something that could be cleared, or if there was some advice that could be given, maybe I would be able to help.
But before Imran Khan could act, Diana went to Saint-Tropez on the French Riviera. She'd been invited to the home of the Egyptian businessman and owner of Harrods department store, Mohammed Al-Fayed. He had been refused a British passport and claimed he'd bribed several British politicians. Diana arrived on the 11th of July, followed a day later by the press.
We were all together in the same place, all lined up like a photo call, just like at the Cannes Festival. And in front of us, a performance would begin every day at about the same time, at about 11 o'clock. Diana jumping in the water, diving, jet skiing, in a swimming costume, not hiding herself, right in front of us. Well, the whole thing was just extraordinary, I can tell you. I'd never seen anything like it.
She came over to our boat determined to have a say. I remember she saying, "No photographs, no photographs." And she said, first things, "How long are you going to be here?" And we told her, and she said, I don't want to live abroad like my boys want me to. And I thought, oh God, we're going to drive this woman away. And then she did an amazing thing. She went to the edge of the jetty, did a most beautiful dive into the sea, and swam around, laughing, and as though she was having a wonderful time. It was one of the most bizarre things.
Diana's show for the cameras coincided with the 50th birthday party of Camilla Parker Bowles.
Camilla Parker Bowles heading for her birthday celebrations at Prince Charles's Highgrove home. A party going on now at which there'll be no attempt to keep secret the loving relationship between Charles and Camilla.
Diana told me at the time that she was really hurting about this. It did affect her. I think it has more to do with her hurting inside and showing that she was having a good time.
That same day, Al-Fayed summoned his son to join the princess. Dodi Al-Fayed was a 42-year-old part-time Hollywood film producer. The photographers mistook him for a bodyguard. In Saint-Tropez, one restaurant owner welcomed the group.
Il a dit, tout le monde est parti, sauf Diana.
He told me everyone left apart from Diana and her bodyguard. They left 5 or 10 minutes later. They left holding hands, climbed into the car, and drove off. I said, with her bodyguard? He said, well, yes, with her bodyguard. After all, she's a grown woman, and if she wants to go out with her bodyguard, then she can do as she likes.
Diana returned home to a watershed meeting with Hasnat Khan.
Diana told me that her relationship with Hasnat Khan was not going to go any further. And she said, I can't just sit home at Kensington Palace, Lana, and watch the four walls. I'm a young person. I need to get out.
At the end of July, Diana went back to the Mediterranean. Only this time she was on her own with Dodi Al-Fayed.
Here was a gentleman who was giving her a very good time. He was attentive. She was having a lovely summer in beautiful circumstances in the south of France.
Dodi Al-Fayed was simply a rebound situation. Calculated, I suppose, to upset Hasnat Khan, the person she'd been seeing. I think it was simply a summer fling.
4 days into the cruise, this photograph was taken. Someone close to the princess had called a top celebrity photographer, Jason Fraser, and told him where and with whom she would be. After 2 years of dodging the press with Hasnat Khan, this was one relationship Diana made no attempt to hide. During the cruise, Diana was called by Lana Marks. They had arranged to go to the Italian lakes together in late August. But Lana's father died suddenly.
I called Diana and told her of my very sad news and that unfortunately I wouldn't be able to go away on vacation with her. But this left her with the free week at the end of her summer. And when Dodi asked if she would come back to the south of France, she agreed.
As Diana and Dodi cruised around the Mediterranean, Jason Fraser was once again tipped off about their whereabouts. Only this time, the calls came from Diana herself. She asked him, "Are you getting this? What did you get just now? Why are the pictures so grainy?" Diana also called her friends and gave them different accounts of the relationship.
Diana told me she was very happy with Dodi Fayed. I think she felt that she might have found a new family, and that's something that she always missed, family life. I think she could have got married, and it could have been the fairy tale ending that she wanted.
Diana told me that her summer was coming to an end now, and she had asked for an earlier flight back to London to return 2 days earlier because she'd had enough.
But Dodi persuaded Diana to stay on, and on the 30th of August, they flew to Paris. The couple spent the day in frenetic car journeys across the city.
The word was out that the princess was around. That was the most aggressive sort of paparazzi we'd seen throughout the whole of the summer.
Dodi arranged a romantic night out. But the photographers laid siege to his Paris flat, and Dodi kept changing his plans.
When we left that evening, myself and Kes still didn't know the venue that they were leaving to.
You know, tempers were getting a bit short. It was very close that somebody was going to get injured.
The couple finally decided to dine at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's father.
The pressure was growing because of the number of paparazzi around. Dodi was angry and the princess was shaken up about the whole thing, I think.
She was crying, and I think because she was upset was the main reason why Dodi flashed up at us. He said, how the f*** did you let this fiasco happen? And I didn't lose my temper, but I told him in the strongest terms that it wouldn't have happened if he'd have told us where we were going.
Dodi brought in a new driver, the hotel's deputy head of security, Henri Paul. Dodi planned that they would slip out the back of the hotel unnoticed.
We'd gone to the back and there was a very happy atmosphere there. We were laughing and joking. We walked out. And Henri Paul went to the driver's side and changed seats with the person who brought the vehicle around.
According to the subsequent French investigation, Henri Paul was drunk. The photographers were soon in hot pursuit. Henri Paul made a fateful decision. He avoided the direct route to Dodi's flat. Instead, he accelerated along the riverside and left the photographers behind. He raced into the Alma tunnel and lost control. At midnight, the car slammed into a concrete pillar.
French police say Diana, Princess of Wales, has been seriously injured and her companion Dodi Al-Fayed killed in a road accident in the French capital, Paris. The driver of their car said to be...
Dodi and Henri Paul died instantly. Diana and Dodi's bodyguard, Trevor Rhys-Jones, were grievously injured. The French Interior Minister and his aide were waiting at the hospital when the ambulance carrying Diana pulled in.
The minister was on one side and I was on the other. We lifted her out. We pulled the stretcher out. The princess had an oxygen mask on her face, and she had bruising under her eyes. And at that time, of course, she was still breathing.
At 4 in the morning, the doctors emerged from the operating theatre.
En fait, je comprends quand les...
I realized what was happening after 2 hours. The doctors who were trying to revive her, the emergency team, the heart specialists, they came out. Then I knew it was all over.
He gave a little sign to the minister, and the minister went out. I followed him. And he said to the minister, "She's dead."
We watched the news coming up. It seemed to strike everybody connected with it. I had photographers, two standing to speak on the phone. I had a little girl come in. I'd phoned someone and got a girl to come in and help me on the desk. She was useless. Poor girl just cried for 5 hours.
Within an hour of Diana's death, 6 photographers had been arrested.
The story began to come back that she'd been pursued by photographers. I felt ill at the thought of this. And I felt guilt and sadness.
At Balmoral, the royal family were thrown into turmoil.
I was told by 2 sources, one royal, one ministerial, that there was a tremendous breakdown between the Charles camp and the Queen's camp. The Queen did not want Diana's body to go to any royal palace, royal chapel. She wanted it left at an undertaker's. Charles, driven by the boys, wanted a proper royal send-off and all the protocol to kick in. The whole thing deteriorated into the most appalling slanging match, which at one point found Charles shouting at Sir Robert Fellows, Diana's own brother-in-law, the Queen's secretary, "Why don't you just go and impale yourself on your own flagstaff?" An extraordinary phrase. And another royal official saying, "Well, what would you rather, ma'am, that she be taken away in a Harrods van?"
8 hours after Diana died, the royal family set off for Sunday church. As always, since the divorce, Diana's name was left out of the royal prayers. Outside Buckingham Palace, the first signs of the extraordinary public reaction to Diana's death. As Prince Charles left for Paris, the Queen was still refusing her former daughter-in-law all royal privileges.
The row continued even while Charles was in the air, because denied royal protocol, he now had to find some way of getting all the things which protocol would normally have provided. What kind of a coffin, the provision of flowers, guard of honour, flags, all the rest of it. And he was now having to call on the government, and there was effectively an open line from the flight deck to number 10.
The only thing that mattered to him from start to finish was concern for the Princess of Wales. Little details. We couldn't find one of her earrings, and he kept saying, "No, she can't go without her second earring." Little things like that. You could tell he was really, really distraught, completely shattered.
There was still a row burning as the plane was coming back as to where the body was actually going to go. The Queen pretty sure now that she'd got her way and that it was going to go straight to the Fulham Road undertakers, and Prince Charles determined to get it to St James's Palace to lie in the Chapel Royal there. The government was being asked to provide for both eventualities. But in the end, Charles got his way.
In the streets around the palaces, anger was building against the royal family. Many blamed them for expelling Diana. The lack of a half-mast flag over Buckingham Palace was taken as a sign of the Queen's unwillingness to mourn.
Now, I know it's tradition that the flag flies at Buckingham Palace when only the royalty are there, but I really would have liked to have seen the flag flying half-mast there as well.
I think they treated her terrible, absolutely shocking. I don't think they're the most cold people on this earth.
A woman came up to me and said, "Oh, you're that chap from the telly. Can I just tell you this? Why isn't the Queen here? That's what I want to know. Why isn't the Queen here?"
I think it's disgraceful that they're not here in residence, and I think most people I've been speaking to this morning have said exactly the same thing.
And I went back to the studio, to my ITN studio, and told my bosses about all this, and their reaction was exactly the same as I know newspaper editors' reaction was. This is dangerous stuff.
On Thursday, 4 days after Diana's death, newspapers took up the charge.
There was a meeting to discuss the funeral at which senior police officers were present and royal officials. A senior police officer at that meeting, I am told, expressed the view that the Prince of Wales would be booed or worse if he was to turn up in London at such a sensitive time.
The following day, the Queen returned.
There were real worries, according to my ministerial source, about what kind of a reception the Queen was going to get. The worry was things would be thrown, and people would jeer or shout or abuse her. And so the decision was taken that they should do it as near the gates of Buckingham Palace as possible, so that an escape existed if anything went wrong. My royal source says that even the Queen was worried about what kind of a reception she was going to get. There was real fear that she's never previously experienced in her reign.
But would the Queen now respond to the people's will?
First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys.
As the day of the funeral dawned, more than 1 million people lined the route.
I'm picking my way through these crowds and bumping into this friend of mine who I'd not seen for a good few months, and always thought he was a bit of an anti-royalist, really. Certainly his position was, well, take it or leave it, and, what's it to me kind of thing. And there he was, with his mother, with a tent, on the pavement, kipping out, and I'm like, what are you doing here? And he just said, well, we had to come. And I thought to myself, she probably would have liked that. That would have made her smile.
And finally, breaking with royal tradition, a flag flew at half-mast over Buckingham Palace.
All over the world, she was a symbol of selfless humanity. A very British girl who transcended nationality. Someone with a natural nobility who was classless, and who proved in the last year that she needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic.
The applause, which erupted outside Westminster Abbey and quickly spread inside, was a reminder that for years Diana had battled against the royal establishment. She had at times been vindictive and erratic, but millions worldwide mourned Diana for her compassion and her courage, qualities which in a short but dazzling life she had so often displayed at their best.
Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister. The unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.